Welcome to MysteryCon. We hope you're well and still living in the version that remembers. They didn't just erase people, they rewrote reality. Now we're what's left, glitched versions trying to remember a world that never officially existed. If that stirred a memory you can't quite place, like the video, subscribe, and drop a comment before this version disappears too. They told me I never had a sister, but I remember her laugh echoing through the vents at night like it was the only real thing left. My name is Mark Drennan, and this is the part they couldn't delete. It started on a morning so normal I almost missed the anomaly. I walked past her room on the way to the kitchen, expecting the usual mess, clothes on the floor, music leaking under the door. Instead, it was closed and silent. I knocked once. No answer. When I opened it, the air inside was stale, untouched. No posters, no bedspread, just blank walls and a neatly folded blanket on a bed I didn't recognize. I thought maybe she'd left early. Then I saw the closet. Empty. Not packed, cleared. Like no one had lived there in years. I asked my mum if she'd gone out. She looked at me like I'd said something cruel. "You've always been an only child," she said. Her tone was gentle, practiced. I turned to my dad. Same look, same line. That was the first tear in the fabric. I tried to find proof. Photos, school records, messages, all gone. Our shared videos, erased. Group chats, deleted. Except for one thing, a box in the attic with an old cassette labelled Summer '03. My handwriting. I didn't remember labelling it, but I knew what was on it. I dusted off the stereo, popped the tape in, and hit play. There we were, kids laughing, shouting over each other. Her voice layered on mine like we were the same note played twice. She sang the wrong words to a soda commercial jingle and I corrected her. She laughed. Clear, sharp, real. I didn't cry, I didn't panic. Not yet. I just sat on the floor, listening to her speak like it was a call from the past. But beneath her laughter was something else. A sound I hadn't noticed before. Low, steady, like a pulse hidden under the static. It repeated every 27 seconds. I didn't know it then, but that was the signal. And it wasn't just on the tape, it was waiting in me too. I played the tape again that night, this time through headphones. I kept the volume low, listening for the pulse beneath her voice. There it was. Not part of the recording, something else. A low frequency pattern, too steady to be natural. It didn't skip or drift. It measured me, every 27 seconds like a breath I couldn't hear, but still felt in my chest. I stayed up tracing it, trying to isolate the sound using free software. Nothing fancy, just enough to confirm it wasn't part of the original audio. When I slowed it down, it reminded me of something between a heartbeat and a sonar ping. Except it didn't bounce back. It was one way. The next morning, I brought the tape down to the kitchen. My parents were reading the paper, eating toast like it was any other day. I put the cassette on the table. "Do you remember this?" I asked. My mom didn't even glance at it. "Where'd you find that?" she asked, casual, like I'd dug up an old shopping list. I pressed. "You don't remember the song, the jingle she used to sing?" My dad looked up then. His eyes were calm, too calm. "We've talked about this," he said. "There's no she, just you. Always has been." That's when I saw it. The way their eyes didn't flinch. No confusion, no discomfort. Like they'd been coached. I left the tape on the table and walked out. I started digging in corners most people don't go. Archived forums, old threads on forgotten sites, people talking about memory inconsistencies, lost relatives, vanished records. It sounded like grief until it didn't. I found a thread buried 3 years deep with only 2 replies. The original post asked if anyone had ever remembered a sibling no one else could recall. The second reply stopped me cold. If they're gone and you're still remembering, you're not broken. You're resistant. I messaged the poster, not expecting a reply. They responded within minutes. Just one line. If you're hearing the pulse, you're already inside it. Start analog. Avoid networks. Trust nothing connected. Then their account vanished. His name was Ryan. We used to sit next to each other in high school computer lab, back when the internet still felt
like an escape instead of a cage.
I hadn't spoken to him in years, but I remembered he was into signal processing and worked freelance out of his garage. I told him I found an old cassette with audio artifacts I couldn't explain, kept the rest vague. He agreed to take a look. When I showed up, his house smelled like solder and dust. We sat at a folding table covered in wires and split open radios. He popped the tape into his deck, patched it through some custom equipment, and played it. We both listened. He squinted at the screen, then leaned back. "You hear that hum under everything?" he asked. "Yeah. Not electrical noise. It's patterned. Consistent." He tapped a few keys. "That's not random. Someone put this there." He paused the playback and turned to me. "Where'd you get this?" I told him it was mine from childhood. He frowned. This wasn't made on a toy recorder. Whoever embedded this knew what they were doing. Look at the shape. Symmetrical decay curves. That's synthetic. Someone wanted it to stick in your head. I asked if he could isolate it. He nodded slowly. "I'll try, but if I disappear, burn the tape." He was half joking, but we both laughed too quietly. Later that night, he texted, "Found a frequency match, not public, buried in a Novosin patent filed under neural feedback systems. Will explain tomorrow." He didn't show up the next day. No answer. Phone dead. I drove to his house. The lights were off. Windows dark. I knocked. Nothing. His garage door was padlocked, and the driveway was swept clean. No footprints, no tire marks, like no one had been there in days. I sat in my car across the street, pulse rising. After 20 minutes, a light came on upstairs. A silhouette stood in the window. I recognized the shape. It was Ryan. But he didn't move. He just stared out into the dark, motionless, watching nothing, or maybe watching me. I didn't knock again. For 2 days I didn't leave my room. The walls felt thinner. The air didn't move right. I pulled the curtains shut and unplugged everything. The stereo, the laptop, even the router. I shut down every signal I could control. I played the tape again, but the laughter sounded different now. Distant, filtered, like it had passed through too many layers. I tried to draw her face, but it kept coming out wrong. I'd forget the curve of her chin or the way her eyebrows tilted when she was about to lie. I tried to remember the day she broke her arm falling off the jungle gym, but I couldn't recall if it was a Tuesday or a weekend. What if I never knew? What if I'd invented her? I stared at the walls for hours. Pinned up pages I'd printed, gone. I didn't even remember taking them down. Maybe I never did. Maybe they weren't there. That night, I found myself in the bathroom, gripping the sink. I looked into the mirror and said her name out loud. Once, then again. It sounded wrong. Foreign. Like I was reading from someone else's memory. I splashed water on my face and felt nothing. no clarity, just the weight of something I couldn't prove, pressing into the back of my skull. I opened my palm with a blade, just a shallow cut, just enough to feel something untouched by them. The blood was real. The sting was real. That's what I told myself. The next morning, I woke up on the floor with the recorder still running beside me. I rewound it and listened. My voice whispered her name in a loop, over and over like a broken prayer. And then it changed. On the recording, buried under my voice, I heard the pulse again. Clearer now, more frequent, every 19.3 seconds. They were adjusting, not deleting, adapting. They weren't just watching anymore. They were responding to how much I remembered. I wasn't just hearing the signal, I was inside its structure. I'd crossed some invisible threshold and now they knew I was resisting. But that also meant something else. Somewhere in the system I still mattered. I stopped searching online. Every site felt compromised. The deeper I went, the thinner the air got. Threads vanished mid-refresh. Accounts disappeared the moment I messaged them. Even my backup emails started bouncing. It felt like trying to run through water that got heavier the faster I moved. So I changed tactics. I went to the library, not the main city branch, too monitored, a tiny one on the edge of town tucked behind a post office. It still had microfilm readers and a dusty local archive no one touched. I wasn't looking for answers anymore. I was looking for names. I spent 3 days sifting through public records, company registrations and government filings. Most were boring, grant applications, infrastructure plans. Then I found something. A 2013 zoning variance filed by a private biotech firm called Orivo Neural, listing signal compliance testing equipment under their installation notes. The company dissolved 6 months later, but in one of the documents I found a list
of engineering contractors. Near the bottom, consultant cognitive architecture, E. Vale.
I wrote it down and walked straight out. Back home, I started piecing together the breadcrumb trail. Vale wasn't on social media, no bios, no papers under that name. But in an old tech journal, print only, I found a letter to the editor from a researcher at Subvector Labs, arguing about the ethics of neural deprioritization. The writer signed off as Elijah 5. The lab had since merged with a Novisin subsidiary. I checked a corporate registration archive. Subvector's final address listed a business park in Maryland. No suite number, no contact info. But it was something. I bought a bus ticket with cash, no credit cards, no phone. I used an old analog recorder and a road map, like it was the 1990s. I kept the tape in a lead-lined cassette box, tucked deep in my backpack, wrapped in foil and paranoia. I didn't know if Elijah Vale was still alive, or sane, or willing to talk. But the closer I got to him, the more I could feel it. The pulse wasn't just tracking me anymore, it was circling. Like it had noticed I was moving towards something it didn't want found. The business park was barely that. Just a row of squat, windowless offices behind a chain-link fence. Half the units were vacant. One still had a rusted sign, Neural Systems Consultant, E. Valen. I waited until late afternoon. A beat-up sedan pulled into the lot. The man who got out walked slowly, keys in hand. Older than I expected, thinner. Worn down like an old circuit, bored. I followed at a distance, staying in the shadow of the awning. When he opened the door, I slipped in behind him and said, "Elijah." He froze, didn't turn, just said, "You shouldn't be here." "I remember someone they say never existed," I said. "I know about the signal. I know your name." He looked at me then. His face was careful. Not surprised, just tired. I'm not a journalist, I added. I'm not trying to expose anything. I just want to understand how to remember her. He let me in. The office was a mess of old servers, notebooks, unmarked cassettes. A wall of hand-drawn signal graphs covered one side. He poured 2 glasses of water and sat across from me. You're hearing the pulse, he said. That means you've resisted the first layers. What layers? I asked. Elimination happens in 3 phases, he said. First, digital erasure, then physical traces, finally, cognitive unlinking. Memories lose emotional priority. They're still there, but your mind stops reaching for them. I asked if it could be reversed. Not entirely, he said, but you can anchor what's left. Strong analog inputs help, written accounts, spoken memory, ink, blood, pain, emotion strengthens resistance. He stood and pulled a sealed cassette from a box, handed it to me. Record everything, not just what she was, but who you were when she existed. That's the trick. They don't just remove people. They erase the version of you that knew them. I stared at the cassette. It felt heavier than plastic. Why did you help design it? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, they said it would reduce trauma, clean up memories. Then the military came. Said they'd found
a more strategic use. I left without asking more. He didn't try to stop me.
But when I looked back, he was already locking the door. When I got home, the tape was gone. Not the one Elijah gave me, the original. The Summer '03 cassette. I'd hidden it in a locked drawer beneath layers of junk. But the lock wasn't broken. Nothing else was touched. Just the tape, removed cleanly like it had never been there. The next morning, I woke to find my bedroom walls bare. Every note, every printed thread, every sketch I'd taped up, gone. My handwriting erased from the surfaces like it never belonged. Even the typewriter ribbon had been replaced. They weren't just watching now, they were intervening, not violently, not loudly, just enough to unwrite momentum. I held the new tape Elijah gave me like it was glass. I recorded everything, her name, her crooked smile, the way she sang off key and clicked her tongue between words. I told stories into it, about the time we got caught sneaking back in after curfew, how she cried when her hamster died, how she fell asleep with her shoes on during thunderstorms. I spoke until I couldn't anymore. Then I sealed the tape, labelled it in thick black ink, and wrapped it in foil and cloth. I tattooed her name on my chest, just below my collarbone. Not her full name, just what I used to call her when we were kids. The nickname no one else knew. It hurt. That was the point. Later, I found an old ham radio community using analog bursts to swap memories. Short, encoded phrases. One guy in Kentucky remembered a cousin who vanished during a family trip. A woman in Sweden kept a locked journal she read out loud every night. We started mailing tapes to each other, stories, names, evidence, each tape copied and sent again. A memory chain, unindexed, analog, untouchable. They can break links, but they can't burn every copy, not all at once. I know I'll never get her back completely. I've accepted that. But I also know this. She existed. She was real. And I remember her, not as data, not as a glitch, as a human being carried in my chest like a quiet flame. And as long as I do, she lives. My name doesn't matter anymore, but I worked at CERN during Phase Omega, and I remember what came before the blackout. They told us we weren't to document anything during Phase Omega, no digital logs, no personal notes, nothing written down. But I couldn't ignore the gaps. It started subtly. I'd open a project file I didn't remember creating, or find lab equipment set up precisely how I'd imagined it the night before, but had no memory of touching. We chalked it up to stress. Long hours, low light, air that hummed with static. But then the repetition began. Conversations looping. People finished my thoughts before I could speak them, word for word. I thought it was burnout until we all started dreaming the same dream. Every one of us. No exaggeration. A black door hovering in space, a clock dripping like wax, concentric rings spiraling inward until you couldn't tell where they ended or began. The first week, we laughed, swapped details in the cafeteria like campfire stories. Then Dr. Havel showed us the footage, grainy security tape from Lab B2. He walked through a sealed door, no badge swipe, no override. Just passed through. Later, we watched another clip. Mikhailson blurred for a single frame, like an image buffer glitching out. We ran diagnostics. IT blamed corrupted checksum values. But those don't explain the timestamp jumps. I tried to log a report, but my submission file vanished mid-transfer. I watched the progress bar hit 92%, then blinked, and it was gone, like it had never existed. Our systems team called it a loopback echo. Harmless, they said, residual crossfeed from the collider's magnet sink. But when I asked about the incident logs for that hour, they weren't missing. They were
never generated, that's what they said, never generated, like the hours didn't happen. I started keeping this diary offline on a dead laptop with Wi-Fi and mic modules physically removed.
I don't know if it matters. Reality feels porous now. I wake up in my dorm and can't tell if it's the same one I fell asleep in. The desk is the same. The coffee stain near the edge still looks like South America, but I swear the colour
of the walls is slightly wrong, a colder white, more synthetic. If you're reading this, something made it out.
Which means I didn't. Or I did, and this version of me doesn't know it yet. The second week we began anchoring ourselves. It wasn't official protocol, just something that spread in whispers between shifts. Dr. Levesque started it. He carried a small voice recorder and spoke into it every hour, narrating his actions aloud, like a man narrating his own alibi. 9:14 a.m., adjusting ring current parameters, room temperature, stable, no anomalies. At first, I thought it was paranoia. Then I found one in my locker too, labelled with my ID number in handwriting I didn't recognize. I never remembered buying it. But the next time I experienced a blank, a full 15-minute gap during a calibration task, I listened back. My voice was calm, methodical, almost bored, detailing steps I couldn't recall taking. And then, at the end, just before the recording cut, I whispered something. Don't trust the version with the scar. I don't have a scar, not one I remember. That same day, the floor plan to our sector changed. Sub-level C3 had always been a single corridor with storage bays, but now there were 2 new rooms, listed on the internal map, 03 Beta and 03 Gamma. When I tried to access Beta, my badge denied entry. The terminal log showed no denial recorded, as if I'd never been there. I asked Dr. Havel about it. He paused, smiled tightly and said, "There's no 03 Beta." I showed him the map printout. He didn't look at it, just walked away like
nothing had happened. That night, my laptop's power light blinked, even though it was unplugged.
The offline diary file was intact, but a new one had appeared. Same file name, different timestamp. I opened it. The entries were mine, but wrong. They described events I hadn't experienced. A fire in the cryo hall, an evacuation order, someone screaming in French over the intercom. None of it happened. But when I cross-checked camera logs from that date, the footage was missing 32 minutes. Exactly the length of the entry. I told myself it was a prank or a test, maybe something planted to check our resilience. But the air has changed here. We used to joke that CERN felt like a spaceship buried in a mountain. Now it feels like something waiting to launch, or escape, or wake up. By the third week, faces began to change. Not dramatically, not in the way you'd notice across a room, but just enough to feel wrong up close. Subtle shifts in expression, cadence, or eye contact. Colleagues I'd known for years started answering to names I didn't remember them having. Dr. Mira Rasid became Dr. Mirasal overnight, yet everyone used the new name like it had always been hers. Even her ID badge matched. I tried asking her about it once, casually, over coffee. She stared at me too long before replying, "You must be confusing me with someone else," then smiled in that strange, paused way I'd seen more and more lately, like waiting for a cue to continue. I checked my own badge afterward. The name was still mine, but the photo was slightly off. The reflection in the glass didn't match. My left eye looked a fraction lower. The timestamp on the badge, creation, didn't line up with my onboarding records either. It was dated 2 years before I was hired. I brought this to the attention of admin. They told me the system must have imported legacy metadata during a recent server migration. Common glitch, they said. Nothing to worry about. But when I asked for the original file, they said it didn't exist. That same day, I received an internal memo marked Version Conflict Alert. It listed 27 staff names flagged for discrepancies in biometric consistency. I wasn't supposed to see it. It was sent by mistake. 5 minutes later, it vanished from my inbox. I remembered the list, though. Half the names were already missing from the campus registry. I saw Dr. Levesque later, sitting alone in the courtyard behind sub-level D, surrounded by birds that didn't move, not sleeping, not perched, just frozen in place like someone hit. Pause. He didn't notice me. He was whispering into his recorder, eyes glassy, repeating the same phrase. We're chasing the correct version, but it always slips ahead. I wanted to ask what he meant, but something held me back. A low tone was pulsing through the concrete under my feet. Steady, deep, almost musical. And for a moment, it felt familiar, like something I'd heard before, or maybe already forgotten. I stopped trusting clocks. They drifted subtly at first, half a second fast, then slow, then stuck entirely. At one point, my lab watch looped the same 10 seconds on repeat for over an hour. I only noticed when I looked up and saw my coffee steam curling in the same shape, again and again. The feed from Corridor A looped too, just a single segment of footage playing back on a 12-minute delay, showing no one entering or exiting. But I saw myself pass through twice, from 2 different angles, wearing 2 different outfits. One version was carrying a clipboard, the other had blood on his sleeve. I tried checking the backup logs, but access had been revoked. A technician told me the whole system was under audit for timecode interference, a term I'd never heard before. The next day, all corridor cameras were disabled for maintenance. On a hunch, I visited the power node behind Cryo Hall, where diagnostic servers mirrored lab activity in real time. The displays were dark, but one of the thermal monitors had frozen mid-capture. It showed a heat signature in the far corner of the tunnel, an elongated figure standing upright, though no one had access to that sector at the time. The timestamp read Row3 1103. I checked my personal log for that minute. a short audio clip I'd recorded earlier, meant to document test alignment. In the background, beneath my voice, there's a single audible tone, constant, low, rhythmic, a pulse exactly 1.33 seconds apart. I analysed it over and over. It's not ambient noise, it's structured, digital, but organic. Not quite a language, but not random either. When I played the tone aloud in the lab, something strange happened. My laptop fan stuttered. Lights overhead dimmed. My left hand began to twitch involuntarily, as if responding. I shut it down, heart racing, but not from fear. It was something else. Recognition. Like I'd heard the tone before but couldn't place where. Later, I found a note in my locker, printed on plain paper. No signature, no context. Just one sentence. Do not listen twice. I don't remember putting it there. I don't remember opening the locker, but the door was ajar and I could still hear the tone, faintly, even with everything off. They told us the final test would be a dry run. No particle collisions, no beam injection, just a systems integrity check. We'd done hundreds like it before, but the energy in the room said otherwise. Everyone was too quiet, no one made eye contact. Even the console lights seemed dimmer, as if the whole facility had begun holding its breath. Dr. Levesque arrived late, wearing sunglasses indoors and a thick scarf despite the warmth. His recorder dangled from a lanyard around his neck, still running. He didn't speak to anyone, just sat down and muttered, "Mark the version." At 10:47 a.m. the sequence initiated. We were told it would last 15 minutes. At minute 5, the humming started, low, smooth, and strangely melodic. Not like machinery, but like something breathing. Not fast, not laboured, just constant. It settled behind my eyes like pressure building inward. Then the lights flickered. Not a power surge, just a subtle dimming across the board, the kind you feel more than see. I glanced at my workstation, display. All values showed normal, but the time read 10:47. It hadn't moved. Every screen in the control room was locked on the same frame. Temperature, stable. Output, nominal. Clock, frozen. Everyone around me stared ahead, motionless.
Not stunned, not panicked, just paused. I stood up. No one reacted. I called out. No one moved.
I thought I was hallucinating until I noticed the emergency light in the hallway strobing slowly, in rhythm with the same pulse from the tone I'd heard before. I stepped outside the room, heart pounding. The corridor was empty, but I could hear footsteps, not mine, not distant, close, familiar. I turned and saw myself walking toward me. Same coat, same ID, same walk. But he didn't stop, didn't speak, just passed by, eyes forward. I followed him briefly, then stopped. My badge chimed, a notification. Phase Omega initiated. I returned to the lab. Everyone was back, nurse.
Motion, as if nothing had happened. The timer now read 11:02. The whole incident had vanished from our logs.
I asked if we'd experienced any delays. They looked at me like I was joking. I wasn't. But I said nothing else. I knew now we weren't testing the collider. We were rehearsing something we'd already done, or were about to do again. That night, I woke gasping. Not from a nightmare. There was no fear, just a sudden certainty that something irreversible had happened. The room felt different, the air thicker. My clock blinked, and every appliance in my dorm was frozen mid-cycle.
As if time had been cut clean.
I stepped into the corridor. No alarms, no motion. The emergency lights were on, but no one else stirred. I walked to the lab, half expecting security to stop me. No one did. The doors slid open without resistance, and inside every monitor displayed the same phrase, "Restore last known good state." I stood in front of the central terminal. My login worked, but the interface had changed. It looked like a rollback tool, something meant for data recovery, but it listed personnel names instead of files. Mine was highlighted in yellow. Above it, a timestamp, 10:47 a.m., the exact moment the dry run began.
I clicked it. Nothing happened. Then the lights flickered, and I saw a reflection in the screen, not my own. The figure behind me wore the same coat, the same ID, but his face was wrong, blurred at the edges like a corrupted frame. When I turned,
no one was there. The recorder on my desk was running. I didn't remember turning it on. I played it back, my voice calm and quiet. "This is the 4th iteration. Loop divergence now exceeds tolerance. Collapse point reached. Version unrecoverable." I stopped the recording, hands shaking. On the table beside me was a printed document, my own diary entries, the ones I never uploaded, formatted as a debrief file. I flipped through the pages. Margins were marked in red pen with unfamiliar annotations. Confirm echo artifact. Phase sync misaligned. Subject unaware of duplication. At the end, one final note. Preserve cognitive continuity through reinitialization. I backed away. Nothing about this was an accident. This wasn't an experiment that went wrong. It was a process, tested and repeated, and I was part of the calibration. Not a researcher, a control variable. I don't remember how I got back to my dorm, but I remember the feeling when I closed the door behind me, like I'd walked into a set built to resemble my life. Almost perfect, almost real, just slightly off. When I woke, my badge was gone. My nameplate had been removed from the dorm door. Even the photo on the wall, one I didn't remember taking, was missing from its frame. I opened my laptop. The offline diary file was encrypted, unreadable, labeled with a string of characters I didn't recognize. No backups, no logs. Just a new folder on the desktop titled Exit Condition. Inside, one file, a single audio recording. I played it. My voice again, but older, tired. "This is the final pass, resequencing complete. If you're hearing this, the others didn't hold." It cut out there. No metadata, no timestamp, just silence. I left the dorm. No one spoke to me. People moved around me like I wasn't there. My face didn't register at the security gates. The biometric scan returned a mismatch. The system didn't reject me, it simply didn't recognize I existed. I wandered the facility. The halls were colder, the light slightly dimmer than usual. Every access panel I touched showed unauthorized version. In the control room, someone else was sitting at my old terminal. Different posture, different eyes, but same ID, same name on the screen. I didn't confront him. I already knew how it would end. I went back to sublevel C, to the corridor that had never officially existed. The doors opened before I touched them. Inside, everything was clean, silent, waiting. The room was circular, lined with screens showing looping video, me at different points in time. Lab tests, meetings, long, quiet walks across the courtyard. Each clip began and ended the same way, with me stepping through a door and never returning. At the center of the room stood a small pedestal. On it, another recorder. I pressed play. "You're not broken," my voice said. "You're the last stable version." I waited, but that was all it said. The air pulsed once, like a deep breath taken by the building itself, and then everything reset. The lights flickered back to full brightness. The monitors went dark. My name flashed on the wall in green. Identity accepted. It didn't feel like validation. It felt like a hand pushing me back into place. Not into a role, but into a pattern, like a backup copy slotted into a loop that no longer requires consent. I thought of Dr. Levesque then, whispering into his recorder, already lost to drift. Of the others who blurred at the edges, who looped and faded, and were eventually versioned out. They weren't casualties. They were overwritten. And now I know why. CERN didn't fail to contain the system. It refined it, perfected it, and I was the final confirmation that it works. Somewhere beneath Geneva, the machine hums on, not searching for truth, but stability. Not testing reality, rewriting it, one version at a time. I thought the worst part of hospice work would be watching people die. It wasn't. It was what they said right before they went. Walter wasn't my first patient, but something about him settled in my bones like wet fog. He was mid-60s, failing fast, and he spoke like a man still living in a year the rest of us had forgotten, 1983 specifically. He said things like, "They ran it through the chairs and the bleed room's colder on Thursdays," which I chalked up to morphine hallucinations. Until the last night, when his hands wouldn't stop shaking and he pushed a notebook at me with all the strength he had left. His eyes were clear. "Make it known," he whispered. "They're still tracking phase compliance. Some of us never came back right." He died 20 minutes later. I should have thrown the notebook out, or locked it up, like I do with the other heavy. Things patients leave behind. But curiosity is a slow poison. The cover was cracked leather, the pages filled with erratic but legible notes, sketches of underground corridors, childlike diagrams of machines shaped like halos, and lists of names followed by things like non-returned, reinforced memory lock, and echo corridor exposure. At the back was a map, hand-drawn but marked with GPS coordinates. It pointed to a clearing upstate, a stretch of forest near where the old radar towers used to hum. I uploaded the location to a fringe paranormal podcast I sometimes fell asleep to. Just a curiosity. They read it out loud on an episode called Montauk Redux, buried between UFO stories and government mind control chatter. I didn't expect anything to come of it, but within a week, emails poured in, people claiming they'd dreamt of the exact location I described. Some sent sketches of a metal ring embedded in soil. One woman from Missouri described the same tree line angle Walter had drawn in his notebook. They weren't connected. They didn't even know each other. I still thought it was coincidence. I told myself we all absorb the same internet myths, but I was wrong, and the next name on that non-returned list would change everything because it was mine. I spent the next week trying not to think about the notebook. But that's the thing about real fear. It doesn't shout, it waits, it seeps in. I reread Walter's notes in quiet hours, hoping they'd start to feel less strange. They didn't. I couldn't stop glancing at that last page. The list of names. I recognized mine, not the full name, but the way it used to be. The way only someone from before would know it. The way I was registered at the children's facility in New Jersey, back when I was 6, and still had night terrors every time it rained. I hadn't told anyone about that. Not even my sister. At first, I assumed it was coincidence. Maybe Walter had worked at the facility. Maybe he'd seen my records. But there were dates next to the names. The date beside mine, August 12/9/83, I was 4. I checked my vaccination records. That whole month is blank, a gap where memories should be. The same week the podcast aired, 2 listeners went missing trying to find the clearing. Their last messages were frantic, glitches in audio, dropped, calls. One resurfaced 4 days later, found barefoot on a highway in Delaware. He couldn't remember anything. His fingernails were packed with reddish soil, the same rust-colored grit I'd seen on Walter's hands when he handed me the notebook. I started seeing files on my desktop that I never downloaded. Old PDFs, blueprints, blurry scans of what looked like medical intake forms, blank headers, just patient codes, and diagrams of brain structures. My name showed up again, buried in metadata. I tried deleting the files, but they kept coming back. Then Walter's journal disappeared. I'd locked it in my desk drawer at the clinic. The lock was untouched, but the drawer was empty. I asked around, played it off like I'd misplaced it. No one had seen it. That night, during a telehealth check-in, I caught something in the screen, just for a second. My reflection lagged behind the video. A half-second delay, long enough for me to realize I was being watched, not hacked, observed. Something had been triggered. I just didn't know yet if it had started with Walter or with me. I stopped sleeping. Not fully. My body rested, but my mind stayed alert, listening for something I couldn't name. I began checking my devices constantly, expecting more files to appear. They always did. A folder would duplicate itself, or a new timestamp would show up, even if I hadn't touched the laptop. One night, my search history included terms I never entered: time loop conditioning, sensory partition training, Montauk, Phase 6 footage. I knew those phrases. They were from the notebook. I hadn't typed them. At first, I thought it was malware. Maybe a listener had targeted me, but antivirus scans showed nothing. It wasn't a virus. It was a script, behavioral, designed to mimic my searches and then evolve. I started reading Montauk forums again, digging deeper than before. Most were wild speculation and bad Photoshop. But one comment thread caught my attention. Buried under a post titled Phase Echo Compliance, someone with the handle ArchTrack78
had responded with a line that chilled me. You're being sandboxed.
They're not stopping you, they're watching how far you'll go. I messaged him directly. Hours passed with no reply. Then, just before 3 a.m., he responded. No greeting, just coordinates. I checked them. A payphone location in Yonkers, 20 minutes from me. The message said, one call, 3:17 a.m. sharp, no devices. I went. I didn't even think about it. It was the first time I felt more curious than afraid. The street was empty. The air was cold enough to sting. At 3:17 exactly, the phone rang. I picked it up. A man's voice, steady, no accent. You're not delusional, he said. The dreams people are reporting aren't shared hallucinations. They're bleed-throughs. I asked who he was. He ignored the question. Your name's not on that list by mistake. You were part of the batch. We all were. You were sanitized. I asked what that meant. He paused, then said, your memories were neutralized, not deleted. The signal is destabilizing that work.
That's why you're remembering. But you're not the subject. You're the vector. The line went dead. No click. Just silence.
I stood there for minutes, phone pressed to my ear, until I realized the payphone keypad was glowing faint blue. After the payphone, I stopped trusting what I heard, not in some abstract sense. I mean literally. Sounds began to change. Commercials included words that hadn't been there before. I'd catch them just once, like a stutter. End transmission, whispered behind a toothpaste ad. A GPS voice mispronounced my street and rerouted me down alleys I'd never driven. I started, recording everything, then replaying it to check. Most of the time, the anomalies weren't there anymore. But once, in a radio broadcast, the static between songs looped in perfect intervals every 27.4 seconds. It matched something from Walter's notebook. Signal pulse, 27.4 sec interval, non-auditory encoding. I didn't know what non-auditory
meant in that context, but it wasn't the first time I felt something rather than heard it. My teeth would ache, my eyes would water without warning, and always there was this sense of being redirected, not attacked, just discouraged. I stopped listening to music. I turned off the car radio, but the patterns found new ways in.
The walk signals at intersections flashed in off-tempo rhythms. Random web pages would redirect before loading. I started counting how often it happened, 3 to 5 times a day, always followed by a pressure behind my eyes. Then came the dreams, not mine, other people's. Listeners began sending recordings, describing vivid dreams of a circular platform surrounded by static trees. Their sketches matched the site on Walter's map almost perfectly. People described seeing themselves in third person. One woman said she'd watched herself dissolve into light, then wake up with soil on her sheets. A few of the dreamers had gone missing after trying to visit the site. But what kept me up was the voice in one message. A caller from Arizona, shaky, half asleep. To voicemail I replayed 20 times. He whispered, "You're broadcasting again. That's why we're waking up." I hadn't told anyone I was planning to share Walter's story publicly, but that night, my podcast episode on Montauk aired. Within 12 hours, the platform flagged the account for foreign influence.
Operations.
My medical license was pulled for pattern anomalies. No one explained what that meant. I packed a bag and drove without a map. It didn't matter where I went. The street cameras followed. They always turned a second too late, just enough to make sure I noticed. I drove until I ran out of road. It was a dead-end town in western Pennsylvania, the kind of place where gas stations still had analog pumps and no one asked questions at motels. I checked in under a name I barely remembered until I saw it written in the ledger. E. Lang. It was mine once. I used it before I became a nurse, before I was anyone. I don't know why I used it. It just came out. The room was quiet, too quiet. No TV, no cell signal. I liked that. I set up my recorder anyway, more habit than purpose. I started talking to the mic like I used to, narrating everything I could remember. Not for an audience, just to feel tethered. The last thing I said before the blackout was, "I think I've always been part of this. I just didn't know what this was." I woke up on the floor hours later. The mic was off. My bag had been moved, zipper still closed but misaligned. My phone powered off. When I stood, I felt a burning under my left arm. I pulled up my sleeve. 3 words had been carved into my skin in clean, deliberate lines. You were one too. The blood had dried. The cut was shallow, but precise. Not self-inflicted, not random. I didn't scream, I didn't even panic. I just sat on the edge of the bed, breathing slow. Because something about it felt familiar. Not the pain, the message. I'd seen those words before, in a corner of Walter's notebook, half erased under a water stain. My laptop was open on the desk. A folder sat on the desktop, newly created. Inside were screenshots, video frames of me in the motel room, asleep, time-stamped. 1 every 7 minutes, none from my own camera. I checked the ceiling and vents, no obvious lens. But one thing stood out. In each image, a shadow hovered just outside the frame.
Not quite human. Always facing me. They weren't trying to scare me. That's not what this was. This was proof. Proof that I had been monitored for longer than I'd realized, and whoever was doing it wanted me to know. I didn't leave the
motel. Not that night. Not the next day either. I stayed inside, unplugged every device, covered the mirror, and pulled the batteries from anything that could transmit. Still, the clock blinked 3:17 a.m. each time I looked at it. Even when I changed the time manually. Even when I unplugged it entirely. I started writing on the walls, dates, names, phrases from the notebook. I wasn't trying to solve anything. I just needed to see it all at once. By the second night, I stopped referring to Walter's journal as his. It wasn't denial. It was clarity. Pieces of it felt too intimate, too specific. One page listed a hospital rotation schedule I recognized from my first year in nursing. Another had notes written in shorthand I hadn't used since high school. I flipped back to the front cover, ran my fingers under the flap of leather binding, and there it was, a faint, faded label, Lang E, Phase 6 compliant. They hadn't given me the journal, they'd returned it. That's when I understood. This wasn't about exposure. It was about reintegration. The signal, the files, the dreams, none of it was accidental. I'd triggered something when I shared the coordinates, but not with the world, with myself. That's what the man on the phone meant by vector. I wasn't a witness. I was a delivery system. I left the motel at dawn. No checkout. I drove without direction, ending up near a place I hadn't seen in 20 years. A shuttered community hospital outside Binghamton. It was abandoned after a fire. Or that's what I'd been told. The building looked untouched. No scorch marks, no boarded windows. But my badge still unlocked the back entrance. Inside, the halls were too clean. No dust, no decay. The power worked. I walked past the old break room, past pediatric intake, down toward records. On the wall where the directory used to be, someone had etched a message in black marker. 6 words, slanted handwriting, familiar. Memory is not consensus, wake others. That was the moment I stopped running, because the message wasn't for me. It was from me. The power should have been cut. That's what I kept thinking as I walked through the lower halls of the old hospital. The city had condemned the place years ago, yet every emergency light was still on, dim but steady. I passed broken gurneys, abandoned exam rooms, no graffiti, no dust. It felt staged, like someone wanted me to find it in this exact state. The records wing had been sealed, but the maintenance door behind radiology was unlatched. I followed the corridor down 3 flights to the sub-basement. That's where I found the old server room. The glass door had no lock. Inside, racks of machines stood humming in quiet sync. Not loud, just enough to make the floor vibrate. Only one terminal showed activity. The monitor was already on. A single file sat in the middle of the desktop. Montauk bleed.x. I paused. Not out of fear. Out of recognition. I'd written that file name before. Years ago. A memory, buried deep, surfaced in pieces. Me in a chair, typing with gloved hands, copying the same file to multiple drives. I didn't know what it did then. I do now. I opened it. The screen shifted to black, then flickered into data, a list of names, thousands, mine among them, then a map, red pulses scattered across continents, blinking every 27.4 seconds. Beneath it, a line of code repeated without pause. Broadcast active, latent vectors engaged. This wasn't exposure, it was reactivation. We weren't victims, we were planted. Scattered sleeper remnants left behind after memory partitioning. And the podcast, the dreams, the journal, they weren't accidents, they were ignition keys. For the first time I saw my reflection in the monitor. No delay. no distortion. It tracked perfectly, and I remembered everything. The corridor under the tower, the white light, the other children silent but awake. I didn't shut anything down, I didn't run. I walked out as the sun broke the horizon. This time I broadcast differently, not on a feed.
Not through a story. Shortwave, low band, VHF. Simple pulses, no words, just signal. Every 27.4 seconds it reaches someone new. Another sleeper, another piece waking up. We weren't erased, just paused. And now, we're coming back online.
My name is Thomas Rourke, or at least it was before the system decided I no longer needed one. They erased my birth certificate last. That's how I knew it was real. You don't delete someone's existence for asking the wrong question unless the question came too close to the clockwork behind history. My name used to exist in 100 systems, HR records, intelligence rosters, tax audits. Now it doesn't exist anywhere. And that's not paranoia, it's protocol. I was a senior analyst at the NSA's Temporal Integrity Division. Yes, that's a real unit, buried 3 sublevels beneath Fort Meade, with air so filtered it stank of sterility. Our task? To verify the continuity of communication metadata
Across global systems. Sounds dry, right? Until you realize what happens when metadata doesn't line up.
What happens when messages arrive before they're sent? I remember the anomaly that started everything. A compressed data stream, marked low priority, bouncing through a Malaysian telecom relay. It contained metadata from April, except the originating device, a government-issue tablet, wouldn't be manufactured until June. That should have been a glitch. But it wasn't. The header checksum passed. The encryption signature was valid. And the contents, scrambled speech logs, fragmented emails, timing pings, were hauntingly precise. Worse, they began to repeat, always with minor variations like someone was adjusting the future based on how the present responded. Curiosity got me. I shouldn't have followed the thread, but it led somewhere. A node outside the main government, backbone, ghost IP, no DNS record, pinging off a defunct DARPA cluster called Project Zero Time. I thought it was a relic from the Bush era, maybe an old data latency lab. I was wrong. Inside I found a log, neatly ordered predictions, not forecasts, predictions, names, events, timestamps. I scrolled through it until I saw my own, flagged critical variable, with a termination estimate and probability curve. That's when I knew this wasn't surveillance, it was orchestration. When I confronted my superior, she didn't blink, just stared through me like the outcome had already been rehearsed. 36 hours later, I was locked out of all systems. My apartment was emptied, my credit history voided. I ceased to exist by every metric we once trusted to define identity. I'm telling you this not to be believed, but to be remembered. Because you can't fight a system that sees you coming. You have to become the variable it can't predict. I left Maryland under a raincoat and a false name. The hotel I checked into was the kind of place no one remembers. Cash only, flickering hallway lights, walls that smelled like bleach and mildew. I didn't sleep the first night. Just stared at the ceiling while replaying the node logs in my mind. They hadn't just predicted events, they'd intervened. I traced patterns I wasn't supposed to see, memes seeded before protests erupted, stories posted hours before whistleblowers came forward, not leaks, scripts, and whoever ran Zero Time had access to a model that didn't just observe the world, it shaped it. I needed a crack, an entry point outside official channels, so I went to where the old truths fester, the dark net. It's slower now, heavier with bots and noise, but still, some voices whisper back if you know the right handshake. I posted a breadcrumb trail disguised as corrupted weather data. 3 days later, I got a reply. Encrypted message. Single line. You're not alone in the drift. Attached was a drive image. I ran it on an air-gapped laptop. Inside, one text file, unsigned and undated, titled Looplog TXT. It listed names, projects, internal flags, all familiar. But one stood out. Dr. Lena Voss. She was a name from the old Defense Research Circuit, DARPA's anomalous systems lead. She'd vanished in 2014, officially retired. I remembered the press photo, sharp eyes, grey streaks, unreadable expression. The log suggested she'd tried to sabotage the project before going dark. If she was alive, she was the closest thing. I had to a map. I burned my old laptop and rebuilt a new one from scavenged parts.
No off-the-shelf components, no software I didn't compile myself. Every signal in or out went through 3 blind relays. Still, I didn't trust it. I didn't trust anything. The deeper I went, the more I noticed strange gaps in memory, moments I couldn't place. Dreams of a room I didn't recognize, always with a window looking out onto rain I couldn't hear.
Once I caught myself typing coordinates into a command shell without realizing it. They pointed to a location outside DC, an NSA black site that shouldn't exist. That was the first time I understood. Zero time wasn't predicting behavior. It was embedding instructions. And somehow, I was starting to follow them. The coordinates led me to a fenced perimeter, camouflaged by dead woodland just outside Prince George's County. There were no signs, no markings, no obvious entry. But the trees didn't grow right near the fence. The soil was disturbed, recently. I watched for 3 nights before moving. Thermal drones flew overhead in a fixed pattern. I mapped their rotation, then slipped in during a blind window just after 2 a.m. My breath was visible in the cold, even though the forecast called for mild temperatures. That was the first clue this place wasn't what it seemed. There was no visible entrance, but near the base of a collapsed utility tower, I found a ventilation shaft covered with a steel grate. Burnt leaves surrounded it in a perfect circle, like something had scorched the air. I pried the grate loose with a crowbar and dropped down 6 feet into darkness. The tunnels smelled like ozone and copper. It wasn't natural. The walls were reinforced concrete lined with fiber optic strands pulsing faintly. The signal wasn't dead down here. It was alive and local. I walked for maybe 20 minutes before I found the first door. It was sealed, but next to it was a biometric scanner that blinked once when I approached. Then the door opened without sound. Inside, the walls were lined with monitors, all dark except one. It showed a looping feed, grainy surveillance of a room I'd never seen but instantly recognized. The window, the rain. It was the room from my dreams. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The feed had a timestamp, 1 week in the future. In the corner of the room was a desk, and on the desk a hard drive labeled with my initials. I backed away slowly, heart pounding. But the door had already sealed behind me. A soft tone sounded from the wall, low and steady. Then a voice, flat and digitized. Initiation confirmed, drift status synchronized. I should have run, but I didn't. Because in that moment, I felt it, something pulling at the edge of my thoughts, like memory becoming instruction. Zero time wasn't tracking
me anymore. It had caught me. I don't remember leaving the facility.
One moment I was staring at that screen, the looped feed of a room that hadn't happened yet, and the next I was on a city bus, soaked through from rain I couldn't recall walking in. My phone was gone. So was the burner laptop. All I had. In my pocket was a paper receipt with a 10-digit string scrawled on the back. I knew better than to check it in public. I got off 2 stops later, ducked into an all-night diner, and paid cash for coffee I didn't drink. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I checked into another hotel under another name. The number was a frequency, ultra-low, narrowband, the kind used by submarines or buried relay stations. I rigged a makeshift receiver from scavenged electronics and tuned in. The signal was faint but constant, a tone repeating every 11 seconds, punctuated by short bursts of binary. I translated them by hand. It was a list: names, dates, coordinates. Mine was near the top. Next to it, a single word: compromised. By then, I'd stopped trusting my own memories. Time felt disjointed, like something had clipped out pieces and stitched the rest back together. I started writing everything down on paper. No electronics, no backups. I hid the notebooks in cheap storage lockers, each one numbered according to its sequence in a pattern I barely understood. I wasn't just documenting, I was decoding myself. Every day I checked the drift logs, and every day the signal adapted, as if responding to my changes. When I tried to erase myself from the pattern, by severing all connections, by moving without reason, it adjusted. Loops collapsed. Others formed. I realized zero time didn't need to chase me. It only needed
to absorb me. Then I made a mistake.
I reached out to someone from my old unit, a tech I trusted, or thought I did. 2 days later, I found him listed in the signal. No timestamp, just resolved. His name was scrubbed from public records within hours, not reassigned, deleted. They weren't killing people, they were editing them out. I wasn't running from a system, I was inside a version of time rewritten to forget me, and I was starting to forget myself. The drift signal changed on a Tuesday. It wasn't louder or faster, it was reversed. The binary sequence I'd been logging for weeks began to repeat in the opposite order, like a tape rewinding. I spent the night transcribing it by hand, line by line. When I ran a comparison against earlier logs, I found exact mirror symmetry, down to the bit. It wasn't just broadcasting data, it was reflecting activity. That meant it had reached a feedback loop. That meant I'd done something it hadn't predicted. I didn't know what part of my behavior had caused the break. Maybe it was the signal disruption I planted the week before, a decoy loop I'd injected into a compromised satellite relay. Or maybe it was the notebooks, thoughts written in ink, stored offline, immune to packet capture or predictive modeling. Either way, zero time had miscalculated, and that gave me the first real advantage I'd had since this started. I moved again, this time under no pattern. No bus routes, no aliases with recycled IDs, no digital footprints. I erased my own trail the old-fashioned way, by walking. I crossed the Potomac on foot at dawn, then disappeared into a string of forgotten industrial corridors stretching south through Arlington. There, tucked in a shuttered telecom substation, I found what I needed: cold hardware. A rusted mainframe once used for state emergency broadcasts, still wired into a legacy fiber trunk. I brought it back online using a battery bank and a salvage terminal. The system was pre-2005, no GPS, no telemetry, just raw I/O perfect. I fed the reversed drift sequence into the core and let it run on loop. Then I layered it with interference, redundant checksum failures, meaningless packet bursts, and time-stamp noise crafted from randomized solar flare data. The effect was crude but deliberate. I was sending junk into the system, distortions it couldn't reconcile. The mirror pulse wavered. For the first time, the loop fractured. That night I dreamed of the room again, same window, same desk, but this time I was standing outside, watching myself work. And when I turned around in the dream, the version of me at the desk turned too. The loop wasn't just reflecting signals anymore, it was reflecting identity. The next morning, I found the mainframe fried. Not a power surge, not physical damage, just blank. No boot screen, no drive spin. Dead like it had never worked. I checked the cables, ran voltage tests, even replaced the board's capacitors. Nothing. Whatever zero time was, it had reached in and shut it down without touching a thing. I didn't panic. I wrote. Everything I remembered from the mirrored drift, every frame from the dream, every change in tone or syntax from the last.
Sequence, every detail, no matter how small.
I knew the pattern was folding back on itself. And I knew I had to push before it closed again. I started what I called the Splinter Protocol. Not a hack, not a weapon, a disturbance. The plan was simple. Leak targeted, false metadata into the global backbone, small enough not to trigger alarms, but precise enough to cause mistrust in the system's timelines. I hit scheduling APIs, financial clocks, cargo manifests. A few seconds shaved here, a mismatch there. I created delay without disorder, drift inside the drift. Within 3 days, the feedback loop destabilized again. This time, the signal didn't just mirror, it stuttered. Bursts of static between patterns. I ran those fragments through my offline parser. They weren't noise. They were image hashes. JPEG artifact. Frames from surveillance footage. All of them featured the same scene. A man sitting in a chair. Beside a window, rain outside, light flickering. The same room, but in each one the man's face was different. Slightly older, cleaner shaven, different clothing, but always me. It wasn't a loop, it was a version tree. Zero time wasn't predicting a timeline. It was managing a cluster of them, testing outcomes in parallel and discarding the unstable branches.
I hadn't escaped. I'd simply become the anomaly that couldn't resolve. A failed version still running in a thread they couldn't end without corrupting the root. That's when I understood what had to be done. I wasn't trying to stop
Zero time anymore. I was trying to force it to overwrite itself. Collapse every stable branch by introducing one variable it couldn't neutralize. And that variable was choice. Real, unpredictable, analog human choice. I just had to make the right one before they erased the option. I waited until midnight before acting. No more simulations, no more passive observation. If zero time was built to adapt, I needed to do something it couldn't prepare for. I burned every notebook, not out of fear, but to sever the trail, remove the echo. Then I walked to a public library 2 towns over, used a terminal I'd never touched before, and sent a single message. A raw, unfiltered dump of the signal noise, disguised as an astronomy dataset, uploaded to an obscure peer-reviewed archive. Not encrypted, not signed, just released. Something the system couldn't recall once seen. Then I left everything behind. No digital trail, no fixed location. I moved west, off-grid, cache only. I didn't run, I scattered. The Splinter Protocol was still working. Fragments of false time drifting through global systems like corrupted DNA. News feeds began to misalign. Transaction logs grew unstable. A whistleblower posted surveillance footage from an empty room that matched my dream exactly. Another claimed their timestamp logs rolled back 2 hours without power loss. I watched from the margins, never staying long, always moving, but the drift stopped showing my name. That was the sign. Zero time hadn't deleted me. It had lost me. The loop broke when I chose something outside its logic, something it hadn't modeled, not sabotage, not submission, just deviation. I knew then I'd never get my old life back. But something better had happened. The system no longer recognized me as part of the architecture. I wasn't a variable to solve. I wasn't part of the loop. Now I write in longhand, far from networks and noise. Sometimes I hear the echo, still trying to rebuild, like a signal bouncing through a forgotten server. But it's fragmented now, weak, uncertain. It can't predict what it can't see, and it can't see what chooses to be invisible. I'm not a ghost. I'm not lost. I'm awake, and this version of me, the one writing to you now, is the only one left outside their clock. They told me it was a liturgical surplus, old gear bound for disposal. They didn't mention it could see through time. My name is Luca Ferretti. I was just a freelance electronics tech, paid in cash, no questions asked, working deep inside Vatican infrastructure most people don't even know exists. I didn't ask questions when I took the contract. Freelance electronics work in Vatican City is rare and well paid, especially if you don't mind keeping your name off the books. My job was simple: refurbish outdated broadcast consoles sealed. Beneath the Apostolic Palace in a decommissioned studio, they called the Archivum Vox. No cameras, no supervisors, just silence and a checklist. On the third day, I was tracing power lines through a dust-caked relay when I found it. A steel drawer jammed shut under a box labelled Liturgical Equipment, 1962. Inside was a scroll of microfilm curled tight like a dried leaf, tagged in faded ink with an internal part number and one strange title: Chronovisor Subassembly Optic Phase Relay. That name didn't register at first, but the circuit design did. I'd worked with phased array antennae in the military. The blueprints were decades ahead of anything from 62. Signal delay loops, parallel temporal buffers, quantum analog sync headers. None of it should have existed, and yet it was right there, drawn by hand, annotated in Latin and Italian. I took scans on my phone, told myself it was for documentation. But the feeling that settled over me wasn't technical, it was religious. That night, I couldn't sleep. By morning, I was prototyping. I mocked up the relay circuit using modern FPGA boards and repurposed an AR headset from a failed university grant. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. At 2:13 a.m. I powered it on. The screen flashed static, then an image, a man on a wooden beam, nailed through the wrists, viewed from behind. Latin chants filled my ears, not looped audio, but live sound, layered with ambient imperfections. The sky was black. The crowd murmured prayers with unsettling clarity. I ripped the headset off and vomited in the sink. It wasn't horror. It was recognition. Someone, somewhere, had built a device that didn't record the past. It tuned into it, and I had just turned it on. I posted a blurred screenshot to a throwaway Reddit account, hoping for clarity. It was deleted within 60 seconds, my IP banned. By the time I got home, my apartment was stripped bare. Furniture, files, drives, even the food in my fridge. No lock broken, no sign of entry, just clean removal. That was when the real paranoia began. I didn't return to the palace. My passcode no longer worked anyway. I spent the next 72 hours trying to recover what I'd seen, scraping Reddit, caches, pulling logs from my router, even scanning my own backups. All gone, not corrupted, wiped, like someone had reached into my machine and extracted the data, leaving no trace it was ever there. I checked old SD cards, burner phones, anything that might have stored a frame or file name. Nothing. My gut told me this wasn't surveillance, it was interception. precision targeting not just of my files, but of memory itself. I couldn't prove.
But the edges of the moment felt frayed, like static had bled into real life. I went underground, literally.
There's an abandoned train platform under Tiburtina station where students squat during winter. I traded spare cables for space and wired the chronovisor prototype to analog gear I trusted, reel-to-reel, VHS capture cards, RF-shielded monitors, no networks, nothing digital. That's when the device flared again, briefly, without input. The headset displayed a new image, Piazza Venezia, Rome, filmed from an upper floor. A man in a grey suit collapsed on the steps. The timestamp read, April 9th, 5 years from now. A digital sign flickered in the background, showing exact temperature and date. At first, I thought it was a simulation, some echo of a film overlay, but the metadata embedded in the footage said otherwise: GPS coordinates, audio bleed from nearby phone calls, facial recognition pings that didn't resolve, like the system was trying to match a future database that didn't exist yet. I ran the footage frame by frame. At the 10-second mark, I saw something that made my stomach seize. In the window, reflection, a figure watching the event unfold. Me, same jacket, same scar on my left cheek. I was filming it with the headset. That broke something in me. I wasn't just observing, I was part of it. I shut the system down and didn't sleep that night. Every noise outside the squat made me flinch. I wasn't afraid of being arrested. I was afraid of being rewritten. Whatever the chronovisor was, it didn't just show time, it stitched you into it. And now I wasn't sure if I was still at the beginning of this story, or already deep inside someone else's loop. I spent the following week trying to contact anyone who might understand what I was dealing with. Historians, electrical engineers, fringe archivists, people who might know about obscure Vatican technology or temporal optics. I used burner emails routed through proxy chains, always careful, always indirect. Most never replied. A few did, briefly, before vanishing. One message stood out. It came from a linguist in Prague who specialized in dead dialects. He claimed to recognize the chant I'd heard during the first chronovisor broadcast. He said it was a lost liturgical Latin, precise to the syllable, used only in pre-schism rites, banned before the 11th century. Then nothing. His email bounced 2 hours later. His academic profile was wiped. Even cached pages returned, 404s. It wasn't just digital erasure, it was as if his name had been deleted from the collective record. That confirmed something I'd begun to suspect. I wasn't dealing with a device that revealed truth. I was dealing with a filter that determined what truth could remain. The headset didn't show the past or the future, it chose them. Or maybe it followed someone else's choices. Either way, the consequences were starting to surface. In the device's local cache, buried inside a corrupted temp file, I found another clip. Short, 6 seconds. A woman standing in front of a charred lectern, reading from a coded script. I didn't recognize the location, but the architecture looked familiar, Romanesque, possibly northern Italy. Behind her, someone adjusted the chronovisor headset on her temple. She spoke in that same impossible Latin, and every syllable sounded like a verdict. Her voice had no emotion, just cadence. The file's metadata listed a creation date that hadn't happened yet, 2 years from now. I tried to save it to a separate drive, but each attempt failed. The system recognized the file but refused to copy it, as if its contents were under embargo by forces beyond software. That's when I started writing everything down by hand, names, dates, symbols, anything that might get wiped digitally. I stopped trusting machines. The silence I encountered wasn't just caution, it was manufactured. Someone or something was preemptively erasing anything the chronovisor revealed. Not because it was dangerous, because it wasn't supposed to be remembered. I relocated to an abandoned textile warehouse outside Milan, half collapsed, but dry enough to work. I didn't bring much, just the chronovisor, notebooks, a gasoline generator, and a few analog tools. No internet, no power grid. I used copper mesh and scavenged iron piping to build a crude Faraday cage around the gear. It wasn't foolproof, but it gave me the illusion of control. That illusion broke when the footage began looping. It started with fragments from the Piazza Venezia clip, then segments of the woman at the lectern, but the timelines overlapped in ways that didn't make sense. Her speech began overlaying the Rome assassination. My reflection changed mid-frame. The figure in the window was still me, but now older, scarred differently, dressed in clothes I didn't own. It wasn't playback anymore. It was recursion. I pulled the device apart, desperate to isolate what was causing the crossover. Inside the optics module, I found a modified fiber node I didn't install. It wasn't Vatican tech. It was newer, labeled in English, stamped with a sigil I'd seen once before in a restricted archive, a stylized cross within a Mobius loop. That symbol had appeared in a classified NATO brief about psychological interference devices, a memo I'd copied years ago and forgotten. I realized then that the chronovisor wasn't unique. It was a node in a system, one of many. I powered it up again to test a theory and triggered a new event entirely. No Rome, no lectern. Just a small, dim room. Bare walls, fluorescent hum. A single man sitting at a table, watching me. He didn't speak, but he was aware. He moved only when I moved. His gestures mirrored mine with a delay, like a buffer syncing in real time. I unplugged the device. The feed didn't stop. It ran for 32 more seconds. When it finally went black, I checked the analog recorder. Nothing had been saved, but the reel had moved. I played it back manually, just static, except for one frame, a still image, the man at the table. His face wasn't mine, but it was familiar. It was someone I hadn't met yet. Someone who already knew what I would do next. After the image of the unknown man appeared, I stopped using the headset directly. Instead, I routed output through isolated analog monitors and filtered the signals through magnetic tape. The results were inconsistent, footage blurred, color degraded, audio distorted, but patterns began to emerge. Not in the images themselves, but in the timing. Each clip ended precisely at the 40-second mark, regardless of subject or signal strength. I mapped these intervals against the Vatican's internal broadcast schedules from the 1960s. The alignment was exact. Every frame coincided with times once reserved for encrypted transmissions labeled liturgical redundancies, a term that appeared in no official glossary. I didn't know what they meant, but I knew who might. An old Vatican archivist, retired now, living in Novara under a different name. I'd met him once years ago while restoring an oscilloscope for a Jesuit university. It took days to find him. When I finally did, he didn't ask how I'd tracked him down. He only asked what I'd seen. I told him everything about the headset, the footage, the man in the chair. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he handed me a sealed envelope. No words, just a nod. Inside was a photocopy of a declassified Vatican protocol, Index Obscura Codex Black. A list of technologies deemed spiritually dangerous, not for what they revealed, but for what they implied. The chronovisor was listed near the top, cross-referenced, with something called temporis blasphemia. Below that, a Latin phrase translated as perception, when divided, becomes captivity. I asked what it meant. He said it wasn't translation, it was instruction. The device was never about observation, it was about segmentation, breaking timelines into consumable loops, then feeding them back to selected viewers. Over time, vision replaces memory, memory replaces experience, reality reshapes itself accordingly. I asked why the church didn't destroy it. He said they tried, more than once, but each attempt ended the same way. Footage of the destruction appeared before the event occurred, and the destruction never completed. The loops self-corrected. By the time I left Novara, I understood. I wasn't protecting the chronovisor. I was being shaped by it. Every decision I thought I made was already recorded. My only weapon now was ambiguity. Not revealing what I knew, but ensuring they could never tell if I still knew it. I returned to the warehouse, but something had changed. The air felt heavier, dense with static. Even with the chronovisor powered down, the reel-to-reel hummed faintly, as if echoing signals I couldn't detect. I stopped trying to decode footage. I started feeding it junk, randomized data, layered white noise, and encrypted television archives. At first, nothing happened. Then, 3 days later, the headset displayed a new scene without input. A cathedral, empty and lit only by candlelight. The camera panned slowly toward the altar, but the perspective was wrong. It wasn't handheld, it was eye level, drifting forward like someone was walking without walking. On the altar sat a second chronovisor, identical in design but untouched by time. The reel recorder froze, the image held on one frame.
A figure in the shadows behind the altar, face obscured. Watching. Always watching. I reversed the reel manually, searching for frame decay. None? The film was intact, but the audio track had changed. It played backwards. A voice repeated a phrase.
In a language I couldn't place, but the cadence matched the woman from the lectern. I copied the audio to cassette and sent it to a linguist I trusted in Munich. 2 days later, I received an anonymous return envelope. No message, no signature, just a clean transcription. The phrase translated loosely as, "Only the unseen remains unbound." I took it as a warning. From then on, I wore a blindfold during playback. I listened, recorded, catalogued, but never watched. Each session left me more disoriented, not from what I heard, but from what I began forgetting. Familiar places lost their detail. Faces blurred in my mind. The line between past and present thinned until memory felt like inference, not experience. One night, I saw myself in the mirror and didn't recognize the expression, not fear, not anger, just calculation. I began crafting false logs, fake signals, corrupted timelines, scripted hallucinations layered with plausible metadata. I distributed these across dead channels and closed-loop networks. My goal wasn't to expose anything, it was to dilute signal, to create enough shadow noise that no one could isolate the real from the false. If they wanted to trace the truth, they'd have to dig through 1,000 lies I'd made, and each one would look just convincing enough to make them doubt the others. I left Milan before sunrise. No destination, just distance. The prototype stayed behind, wired to a repeating loop of scrambled broadcast cycles, each embedded with fragments of false visions and corrupted metadata. If they came looking, they'd find noise, carefully shaped noise. I traveled under different names, always cache, always off-grid, no devices, no paper trail. My notebooks I buried in waterproof. Sleeves across 5 cities, each copy slightly altered. None contained the full truth. That was the point. The chronovisor didn't need to be destroyed. It needed to be made irrelevant. Its power was certainty. My only defense was ambiguity. I began sending fragments of the footage to people unlikely to believe them. Fringe academics, failed screenwriters, retired technicians. I seeded it into online forums under threads about dreams, déjà vu, and false memories. Buried in plain sight, the real clips blended into fiction. Every time a user reposted or shared, the signal fractured further. By the time Vatican security traced one to a server in Berlin, it had already replicated across hundreds of private message chains, each with variations introduced by AI filters, compression errors, and human embellishment. The original truth was now surrounded by so many versions that no one could tell which one had started it. That was when I knew I'd won. Not by escaping them, but by making their target impossible to define. Months passed. Then a year. My name was scrubbed from work contracts. Mentions of my existence disappeared from tax rolls, medical records, even school archives. I had become like the footage, real but unverifiable. I stopped trying to contact anyone, stopped explaining. Truth had become a burden, not a goal. What mattered now was control. I carried nothing with me except a single microcassette labeled Reticuli. It contained a message I never recorded, one I've never played. I keep it for the same reason I left the device operational, as insurance, if they think I still have a working chronovisor. They don't know what I've seen or what I've rewritten. And if you're reading this now, you're not just part of the story, you're inside it. Which means the loop isn't theirs anymore, it's ours. There were over 11,000 people who remembered the same emergency drill in a town that doesn't exist. Same girl, same static, same date. That's not memory failure, that's memory being overwritten. I first noticed it in the 6th anomaly batch. A small town evacuation drill, New Brenton, July 3rd, 1997. The timestamps were always the same, right down to the second. My name is Elise Canner, Memory Systems Analyst at Hallberg Institute, though lately even that feels like a version of someone else. I should have flagged it for statistical noise and moved on, but something stuck. The subjects were geographically scattered, thousands of them, but their accounts aligned down to minute details: the radio static, the scent of melting asphalt, a girl named Lacey crying near a red barn. I'm trained to spot contamination in memory reports, and this wasn't that. This was something different. And it wasn't just the memories, it was the emotion in them. Fear, not described but embedded. The kind of raw panic that registers in galvanic skin response data even decades later. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I ran cross-checks through census data, GPS archives, even shipping records. There was no New Brenton in the current national grid, not in any state, but there had been at least once. I found it buried in a discontinued FEMA server snapshot from 1999, population 4,208, location southeastern Oregon, last listed in 2001, and then nothing. No exit records, no dissolution files. The town just vanished, like it had been dropped from a database, and no one bothered to ask why. When I brought it up at the lab the next morning, Dr. Willoughby smiled too long. "Old records glitch," he said. "We see it all the time." Except we don't. Not like this. Not with metadata tampering so obvious it bordered on amateur. I checked my system logs. 2 hours after I ran the FEMA snapshot, my admin credentials were downgraded. Temporary, they claimed. But when I reopened the anomaly file, the most recent entry was gone. The log itself had been rewritten. Not erased, restructured. By then, I wasn't just chasing data, I was chasing whatever had rewritten it. That's when my husband called me Elise. That's my name, it always has been. But he said it with hesitation, like he wasn't sure. I waited until after midnight to access the archived map layers. Anything touched by the federal data scrub wouldn't show in the standard index, but I knew where to look. Deep in the NoAA backups, under deprecated vector files, I found what I needed. A 1997 geospatial overlay, plain, black and white, but there it was, New Brenton. Latitude, longitude, elevation, all matching the FEMA record I'd found. I overlaid it with current cartography. Nothing. Not even a blank spot. Just a seamless spread of forest and highway that had no record of interruption. I cross-referenced satellite captures from the same quarter. One frame, a low-resolution shot from May of '97, showed grid structures, light paths, rooftops. In the next available frame, taken just 6 weeks later, those features were gone. Not covered, erased. No signs of demolition, no residual soil disturbance, just tree cover like the town had never existed. I sent the images to my secondary account, the one I kept off network, then closed everything down and walked to the kitchen. The house was silent. My husband was asleep on the couch, a documentary paused on the screen. The remote lay at his
feet. I stood there a moment too long, watching his chest rise and fall. When I finally turned to go, he stirred and mumbled, "Emily, come to bed." I stopped cold. He hadn't called me that in years, not even as a joke. "It's Elise,"
I said quietly, but he was already asleep again. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, I checked my ID badge, Emily Canner. The photo was mine, the clearance still active, but the name was wrong, and it wasn't a printing error. The change had propagated to my access logs, payroll records, and internal email handle. My inbox held a message from HR welcoming me to the team, as if I had just been hired. I opened a new tab and typed New Brenton into the search bar. Autocomplete finished the query before I finished typing New Brenton hoax, New Brenton urban myth, Mandela effect. I shut the laptop. Someone had rewritten the map. Now they were rewriting me. I stopped using my work computer. Every traceable action felt compromised. I switched to a clean laptop, one I'd bought years ago and never registered. No Wi-Fi, no updates, just local storage and a stripped-down Linux build. That night I started cataloguing witness reports by hand. Printouts, timestamps, redacted names, anything I could preserve offline. I didn't trust the cloud. I didn't trust encryption. I barely trusted my own memory. The next morning, I brought a copy of my badge to a colleague I trusted, Leah, in archives. She frowned when she saw the name. "Weird. I thought you went by Elise," she said. "It's a clerical thing," I lied. She smiled, but it felt like something behind her eyes had pulled back. I thanked her and walked away. When I returned to my lab station, my login failed. A red error flashed. Access revoked. Refer to supervisor. I didn't refer to anyone. I walked straight out the back stairwell, heart pounding. Outside, the sun was too bright. Everything looked normal, that made it worse. I drove east. No destination in mind, just the need to move. I checked my phone at a gas station an hour later. 4 missed calls from my husband. 1 voicemail. I listened. His voice was calm but off, like someone reading from a script. "Emily, please call me back. You've left some files here, and someone came by looking for you." That was all. No name, no context. I didn't call back. I threw the phone in a dumpster behind the store and paid cash for a burner. That night, I uploaded a batch of redacted files to a private message board known for whistleblower leaks. An hour later, the post was gone, not flagged, not reported, gone, as if it had never existed. Even the cached preview in my browser had vanished. That's when I saw the tab next to it, a page I hadn't opened. It was a cached article titled Project Chrysalis, Memory, Encoding, via Distributed Broadcast Systems. The author's name was listed as E. Canner. There was no byline photo, just the header, a blank screen, and a final line of text. Memory is consensus. You are outside
of it. I met him 2 days later in a city I hadn't planned to visit, Spokane. A place far enough from my usual haunts that I could move quietly.
I sat on a bench near Riverfront Park, my coat zipped too tight against the spring wind. He approached like he wasn't sure I was the one he was looking for, but his eyes didn't scan the crowd. They scanned me. You posted the Chrysalis thread, he said, without greeting. I didn't answer. He sat beside me, leaving a deliberate space. You got my attention, he continued. Not easy these days. I asked who he was. He didn't give a name, just credentials. Former NGA contractor, Geospatial Anomaly Division. I used to track radio wave distortions, then my job stopped existing. I didn't get fired, I just couldn't log in anymore. I asked about New Brenton. He nodded. That was the prototype. Real-time modulation field test. Synthetic recall event seeded via low-orbit broadcast, then reinforced with sleep cycle audio patterns. Target population 4,000 residents, containment radius 22 kilometers. I asked why. His answer chilled me. Because memory's the last system of record they can't fully audit, and if they can't control how we remember, they can't control the story. He handed me a flash drive. This has raw data dumps, transmission logs, drift patterns, loss reports. It proves the signal wasn't just experimental, it went live, multiple times. I asked what happened to the town. He hesitated. It was decommissioned.
Every physical record, every connected database, even civilian recollection, they didn't delete it, they overwrote it. I asked how many people remember. He looked out across the water. Less every year, that's the calibration curve.
Not erasure, replacement. Your name isn't the only thing they've changed. I didn't ask what else. I already knew. I thanked him and stood to leave. He didn't move. One more thing, he said quietly. They monitor retrieval spikes, patterns like yours. People piecing it together. The system flags them before. They even understand what they're remembering. I asked, what happens then? He didn't answer. Just nodded once, as if to say, I was already too far in. I walked away without looking back. I knew what came next. I didn't notice it right away. It started with small things. Text messages arriving out of order, timestamps jumping back an hour, websites I knew well loading with different layouts. My burner phone flashed a notification I hadn't set. Network error, unknown host override. I powered it down and removed the battery. By that point, I was checking into motels under fake names, paying cash, wiping down everything I touched. The flash drive stayed with me at all times, taped behind the battery compartment of an old flashlight in my duffel bag. But paranoia wasn't enough. The real shift came when I tried to contact my sister. I hadn't spoken to her in months, but I needed someone I trusted. When I called, a man answered, calm, polite, unfamiliar. He said no one by that name lived there. I apologized and hung up. Then I checked the number again. It hadn't changed. It was still listed under her name in my old address book. When I tried searching her on public records, she was gone. No listings, no driver's license, not even a birth certificate. I found her high school yearbook online. She wasn't in it. Just a blank space on the row where she should have been. My hands shook as I scrolled. I'd spoken to her. I remembered her voice, the time she broke her wrist, the scar above her eyebrow. But if she was part of my calibration window, she could have been flagged for deletion. Not erased, restructured, like New Brenton, like me. I started writing everything down by hand. I didn't trust digital memory anymore. I carried a spiral-bound notebook and recorded every event, every face, every time I saw my own name misprinted or a familiar face turn unfamiliar. I saw it everywhere now, faces with eyes that didn't quite match their expressions. Strangers who smiled a second too, late. Men in grey coats, standing on empty sidewalks, not moving. The world hadn't changed overnight. It was subtle, measured. I wasn't being chased. I was being isolated. Truth doesn't need to be hidden when no one believes you saw it. They weren't erasing my life. They were replacing it in real time. I woke to the sound of my own voice. The motel TV had powered on by itself, flickering in the dark, volume low. On the screen, a news anchor introduced a breaking report. Dr. Emily Canner, former cognitive researcher at Halberg Institute, has confessed to fabricating government data in an elaborate hoax targeting federal information systems. Then it cut to footage. Me, sitting in a press room I'd never entered, calmly reading from a statement I'd never written. I falsified witness testimony and manipulated archived records to support claims of a fictional town and a non-existent government program, the broadcast version of me said. My voice, my face, my cadence, but not me. I froze, watching every detail. The lighting was wrong. My right hand twitched in a way I'd never seen before. It wasn't a deep fake in this crude sense. It was better. It looked real because it had been real. A live insertion maybe shot in a closed set, possibly with heavy conditioning or partial control. I couldn't be sure, but I knew what it meant. This was the final move, not discrediting the evidence, discrediting me. I shut off the TV and
Packed in silence. There was no more running, no route left that wasn't mapped. They didn't need to chase me. They'd built a world in which I'd already been caught. My name was buried, my research marked fraudulent. Anyone who searched
for Elise Canner would find a fabricated confession and a closed investigation. The calibration was complete. But even in collapse, something held. A thread. I remembered the analyst's words. They monitor retrieval spikes. That meant others were still out there, fragmented, isolated, maybe even erased, but remembering something that didn't match the world around them. I drove through the night with no destination, just one goal: signal the ones still listening. I left handwritten notes in restrooms, gas stations, library books. I used dead-drop message boards and QR codes etched into the backs of street signs. I stopped trying to prove the truth. That was their terrain. I started preserving the evidence of misalignment, the places where memory and reality refused to sync. The broadcast loop said I was gone, but I was still here. And someone, somewhere, still remembered New Brenton. I found the note inside the spine of a library book, The Psychology of Belief. Just 4 words: you are not alone. Below it, a time, a date, and a set of rural coordinates. I burned the slip and memorized the rest. I didn't know if it was a trap, but I was running out of places to go where I hadn't already been declared a ghost. The meeting point was an abandoned library north of Helena, hidden behind a disused trailhead. Someone had rebuilt the power grid. Bare bulbs glowed in the basement, powered by a humming generator. I walked in slow. No passwords, no masks, just quiet nods. They were already there, 5 of them. Different lives, different scars, same look in their eyes, not panic, not fear, recognition. A woman named Ria slid a box toward me. Inside were flash drives, redacted files, old printed maps. One map caught my eye. It was yellowed, fragile. Near the Oregon border, in faded blue ink, sat a dot labeled New Brenton. I lifted it carefully. She said, "You'll want to hold on to that. They can't rewrite print." We didn't call ourselves rebels, just archivists. People who documented breaks, misalignments between what we remembered and what the world insisted was true. One man was digitizing VHS tapes frame by frame, looking for buildings no longer listed in municipal records. Another compared obituary data to active social security numbers. We didn't share theories, we shared proof. I told them about the confession broadcast. Not on any major outlet, just a single closed-circuit station at the motel, looping a manufactured version of me, calm and rehearsed, reading a script I never wrote. She fabricated evidence, she tampered with federal systems. Case closed, that's what it said. But it never aired anywhere else, just enough to seed the illusion. Ria nodded. They don't need the world to believe, just enough of it to drown out the signal. That night, I wrote my name, Elise Canner, into a leather-bound ledger hidden beneath the floorboards. One entry among hundreds. Later, a woman showed me a photo of her father holding her as a child. He no longer remembered her. His documents said he'd never had kids. We don't fight to restore the past. We fight to remember what they can't afford for us to keep. They told me St. Cygnus Estates was built for people like me, quiet, well-credentialed, no kids, no complications. But nobody warned me that the sun rose in the same exact spot every morning, or that the neighbor's dog would die on a Monday, and again on a Thursday. I arrived just after sunset, the sky washed in dull pastels like someone had drained the color too early. The roads were newly paved, silent. Not quiet, silent. Even the crickets held their breath. A real estate brochure sat folded on my passenger seat, still warm from the dashboard. Peaceful living at the edge of the Mojave. It promised stability.
Normalcy. I wanted that, needed it maybe. After years of manufacturing guidance systems and a husband lost to a high-speed test flight, peace sounded like the only sane option left.
My name is Helen Maris, and I thought I was done with systems. The movers left before I arrived. My boxes were stacked with unnatural symmetry. The tap water ran cold immediately. There were no light switches. Everything was motion controlled. My lawn was trimmed, though I'd never met the landscaper. On my first night, I stood outside and listened for any sign of the world I'd just left behind. Sirens, planes, a drunk neighbor's music. Nothing came. It was like the place had been vacuum sealed. By the end of week 1, I knew something was off. My neighbor, Leo Stein, knocked on my door at exactly 8:30 p.m. He introduced himself with a firm handshake and a plate of oatmeal cookies that smelled like they'd come from a lab, not an oven. Retired physicist, he said, worked in classified research near Groom Lake. His eyes lingered a little too long on my walls like he was mapping them. Said it was good to have another observer on the block. I didn't ask what that meant. I just smiled and said thank you. The dog, Baxter, belonged to the couple across the street. I watched it get hit by their SUV on Monday, right front tire, quick. They screamed, cried, buried it in the yard under the ash tree. On Thursday, I opened my blinds and saw the same dog, same limp tail, chasing the same paperboy. I didn't breathe. I just shut the blinds and stared at my reflection. Nothing made sense, but part of me was already adjusting, quietly, like memory rewriting itself in real time. I started tracking the clouds before I realized I was doing it. Every morning at 8:32, a tight cluster of cumulus drifted west to east, low and smooth like they were on rails. Day after day, the same pattern. I marked it down, just to be sure. I used a Sharpie on a sticky note the first time, then chalk on the wall, then timestamps on my phone. I thought maybe I was losing track of days, but my calendar matched the newsfeed. The clouds didn't. By the second week, I noticed smaller loops. The conversation with the mailman repeated itself, word for word, tone for tone. On Tuesday, he told me the neighborhood had real air, like the kind you only get out in the desert. He laughed and handed me a coupon packet. On Thursday, same line, same laugh, same packet. I checked the date. Different. The ink was still warm. I asked if we'd spoken before. He looked confused and said no. Walked off, humming. Inside, I started testing things. I moved a mug to the wrong cabinet, left it there overnight. In the morning, it was back in place. I unplugged the coffee maker. The next day, it brewed by itself. I left a message for myself on the bathroom mirror using a bar of soap. Do not forget. It was gone the next morning, but the mirror smelled faintly of lavender and bleach. That's when I remembered Leo. He hadn't knocked since the first night, but I saw his porch light blink in a strange pattern one evening. 3 short, 2 long, 1 short. It felt deliberate. I crossed the street and rang the bell. He opened the door before I touched it. His hair was damp, his eyes tired. You noticed, he said, not asking. I nodded. He led me into his basement without a word. I expected shelves and tools. Instead, there were maps pinned edge to edge, covered in handwritten notes and equations. I saw dates looping in sequences. I saw charts of decay patterns, all labeled local harmonics. He pointed at one map with concentric circles, drawn in pencil. They're not watching us, he said quietly. They're watching what we do when time bends. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Something deep in me already knew. Leo's basement didn't feel lived in, it felt engineered. The air was cold, not from lack of heat, but from something deeper, like time itself had settled there. He moved, with quiet purpose, brushing aside a curtain to reveal a bank of old monitors wired to machines I didn't recognize. Most were dark, but one showed a faint pulse, a jagged waveform scrolling across a black background. These aren't seismic, he said. They're harmonic echoes, low-frequency signals tuned beneath auditory range. Something's humming.
Under us, Helen. Something constant. He showed me a blueprint of the neighborhood. It looked normal until he flipped it over and exposed the underlying grid. Each house had a point marked beneath it.
Every home in St. Cygnus sits on a node. These aren't just foundations, they're anchors in a temporal mesh. I stared at the lines, trying to make sense of them. You think it's a net? I asked. He shook his head. Not a net. A lens. They're refracting time, folding it. They want to see how we respond. Back at my place, I started recording everything. I left sticky notes in hidden places, inside books, under couch cushions, taped beneath drawers. The next day, I checked them. Most were gone. A few remained, but the ink had smudged or changed color. I found one that simply read, "Try again." My handwriting, but I hadn't written it yet. The loops began tightening. I'd blink and lose hours. A pot of tea I never made was suddenly steeping. I caught my reflection wearing a sweater I didn't own. One night, while brushing my teeth, the mirror showed me turning to the left. I turned right. It didn't match. I stared at myself until the image corrected like a glitch had caught up. On day 21, if my count was still
accurate, I heard a child crying outside. I stepped onto the porch and saw a little girl standing in the road, alone and trembling.
I rushed toward her, but as I reached the sidewalk, she vanished. No trace. Just the sound of sprinklers clicking on in perfect sync up and down the street. That night I circled the chapel on the hill. It was always empty, always locked, but the air near it pulsed like static. Leo was right. We weren't living here. We were being measured. Leo said the word like it hurt to speak. "Iterum," he whispered, pointing to a torn black folder he'd hidden behind a false wall panel. I unfolded the contents carefully. The pages were old, yellowed, stamped with the Department of Defense insignia. Most of the text had been redacted, but some fragments remained. Temporal Containment Protocol, one line read. Another. Consciousness degradation thresholds under loop exposure. The file named the project, Iterum, and listed a single objective: to assess cognitive resilience in fractured time environments. I looked up. They built this place as a test? He nodded. The suburb's a stage, we're the variables. He tapped the final page, barely legible beneath black marker. All subjects unaware, duration indefinite. Restart interval 72 hours. I felt my hands tremble. How long have we been here? Leo didn't answer. He just turned to a wall clock which was spinning slowly in reverse. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw versions of myself, confused, panicked, smiling like nothing was wrong. I started writing on my arm in permanent marker, notes to check when I woke. One morning I found new writing, a phrase I didn't remember adding. Don't trust the calm, my handwriting again, but I had no memory of writing it. The next day I stopped pretending. I tore up the carpet and found copper wiring beneath the floorboards, more than electrical. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. I traced it as far as I could, crawling through the crawl space, and it all led uphill, toward the chapel. We met again in Leo's basement. He'd triangulated the signal's strongest point. It was under the chapel's foundation, centered on a shaft he believed accessed a deeper level, an origin point. If we can reach the source, he said, we might force a collapse or an exit. I looked around the room, at the looping charts, the worn corners of his desk, the stacks of notebooks filled with aborted plans. You've tried before, I said. He looked at me without blinking. So have you. And I knew then I'd lived this moment already. Maybe dozens of times, maybe more. But this time I remembered. We waited until 2:14 a.m., the quietest minute in the loop. Leo said it always aligned. The air turned still, as if the neighborhood exhaled. We crossed the lawn without speaking. The chapel's door, always locked before, swung open with a soft click. Inside, everything was pristine.
Pews untouched, no dust, no smell. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt maintained. At the altar, beneath a wooden pulpit, we found a steel hatch. No hinges, no handle, just a flush panel, waiting. I pressed my hand to it. It opened without sound. A staircase spiraled down, the kind built not for people, but for access.
We descended into silence. The walls were smooth concrete, dry, too clean, no pipes, no marks. I stayed close behind Leo, watching his steps. He carried a modified Geiger counter, tuned to low-frequency harmonics. We're looking for decay.
Seams, he whispered. Places where the cycle thins. A humming began, low and constant. The tunnel narrowed. Clocks stopped sinking.
My watch ran backward. Leo repeated a sentence he hadn't said yet. The hallway looped once, then again. We marked our path with tape, but the marks erased themselves, clean edges where the adhesive had been. I started feeling dizzy, like the air was bending. At the third junction, Leo slowed. His face was pale, like something inside him had gone quiet. He looked back at me, calm, resigned. "You'll remember this next time," he said, voice low and uneven. I stepped forward, but he didn't move. "You always try to pull me out. It never works." His outline shimmered, not a glow but a soft blur, like heat above pavement. I reached for him anyway. My hand passed through, panic surged. I turned and ran. The tunnel warped behind me, turns shifted, lights flickered. My footsteps echoed in wrong directions. When I emerged into the chapel, it was dusk outside, not night. I was covered in red dust. My breath came in shallow waves. At home, the house was altered, furniture rearranged. A half-eaten meal I hadn't cooked sat on the table. The mirror showed handwriting I didn't remember leaving. "You escaped last time too." I stood there, heart steady. Not afraid. Not anymore. Something had changed. I knew it. And now I knew they knew it too. The loop didn't restart this time. It fractured. Days folded into seconds, then stretched into hours with no clear origin. I stopped trusting clocks. I stopped trusting sleep. Every time I blinked, the house changed. A new photo appeared on the wall. A burnt-out bulb was suddenly lit. The radio played a station that hadn't existed in 20 years. My reflection blinked before I did. I wrote notes on my skin, switching to permanent ink when I realized paper wasn't surviving the resets. I began seeing myself in places I hadn't been. Walking down the street, standing in the grocery aisle. One version of me wore a green coat I never owned. Another was crying behind the wheel of my car. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of them through windows. Sometimes I'd see them vanish as I turned. I wasn't watching the loop anymore. I was inside its malfunction. The worst part was Leo's absence. His house was locked, windows dark. I knocked for days, left chalk signals on the doorframe. Nothing changed. Then one morning, a VHS tape appeared on my doorstep. No label. I found an old player in the garage. When I pressed play, Leo appeared on the screen, looking thinner, eyes hollow. "If you're seeing this, the system didn't wipe your memory. That means you're pattern X." He coughed and looked straight into the camera. "They've catalogued every escape attempt, every resistance behavior, except one. You." He reached off screen and held up a drawing, a rough sketch of a spiral, with symbols radiating outward. "This is the core sequence. They've hidden it beneath the chapel, encoded in frequency, not form. You've made it there before. You've failed before, but something about you adapts." The tape cut to static, then briefly flashed, date, August 3rd, 1971, the year before I was born. I sat in silence, staring at the screen. The room around me flickered slightly like old film. I could feel a low vibration in my chest. Not fear, not panic, something new. I wasn't Helen Maris anymore. That name belonged to a version of me that obeyed the loop. I had crossed some internal threshold, from subject to signal, from memory to mutation. I stopped fighting the loop. That's when it changed, not outside, but inside. I started to see the architecture behind everything, the timing of footsteps, the syncopation of bird calls, the exact moment a kettle would whistle. Each event carried weight, like coded signals buried in routine. The repetition wasn't error, it was structure, and now I could read it. At 3:07 a.m. a gap opened. I felt it before I saw it, like pressure lifting from the back of my skull. The kitchen lights flickered in rhythm. I stepped into the hallway and found the wall pulsing faintly just to the left of the thermostat. I pressed my palm to it. There was no sound, but a sudden clarity rushed through me, like every failed attempt had etched instructions into my spine. The wall gave way. Behind it, a narrow passage curved downward, not built, but formed, as if carved by something that understood memory better than stone. I moved without hesitation. The spiral corridor led to a chamber beneath the foundation, beyond even Leo's maps. The air felt thin, but not dead. It shimmered, like it was full of quiet thoughts waiting to be heard. At the center stood a structure, part machine, part monument. I recognized it from Leo's drawing, the coarse sequence. It pulsed with silent rhythm, etched with looping glyphs I'd once dreamed but now understood. This was the origin point, the lens that bent the loop. I reached toward it and didn't hesitate. When I touched it, nothing exploded. No light, no collapse, just stillness. Then everything shifted, not time but perspective. I saw all of me. Versions who had screamed, given up, complied. Versions who had burned the house down or stared at the chapel until their minds went blank.
I wasn't them anymore. I was the one who remembered, the one who adapted without breaking. I turned back toward the passage, calm. The loop would reset, but not for me. They'd mapped every response, every failure, but not this. Awareness.
Within compliance, memory without resistance, a variable they couldn't predict. The next morning, I woke in my bed, curtains drawn, coffee brewing, just like before. But this time I smiled. I knew where I was, and more importantly, I knew who I had become. It didn't sound like a prediction. It sounded like a memory someone else had of my future. The first time Dylan Reeves heard the voice, it was nearly drowned in hiss. He was sitting in the converted garage of his brother-in-law's Long Island ranch, hands hovering over the dials of a battered Kenwood transceiver, more curious than hopeful. They were trying to calibrate for a local repeater. What they found instead was a clean, mid-Atlantic accent reading news items that shouldn't exist. July 2nd, 1981, the voice began. A blackout will paralyze Midtown Manhattan for 6
hours. Emergency services will be overwhelmed. 1 fatality, as reported by The Times, on page A14. Dylan blinked. He'd grown up in New York. There'd never been a blackout that matched. Not then, not like that. But he wrote it down. The voice kept going, calm, surgical.
November 4th, 1995. Plane downed over Long Island Sound. Explosion ruled accidental. Final report sealed. Dylan's mouth went dry. There had been one, TWA 800, but this recording was supposedly from 1981. The frequency faded with a high-pitched chirp, like a tape loop misfiring. His brother-in-law laughed it off. Shortwave pranksters, Russian number stations, who knows? But Dylan couldn't let it go. He came back that night alone, a thermos of black coffee and a notebook in hand. He recorded the signal when it
reappeared. Same voice, new details, some obscure, some chillingly familiar.
When the tape stopped, he just sat there in the silence, the hum of suburban crickets muffled behind garage walls lined with foam insulation. It wasn't just the content, it was the tone, perfectly clear, perfectly certain, like history, being told backwards by someone who wasn't guessing. That night, Dylan didn't sleep. He stayed up, replaying the signal, watching the shadows on the ceiling shift, as if listening too. He didn't believe it. Not yet. But he believed it meant something. And that was enough. Something old had been turned back on. Something that still thought someone was listening. Dylan didn't tell anyone at first. Not his wife, not even his brother-in-law. He told himself it was because he needed more proof. But the truth was simpler. He was afraid of how easily he believed it. Over the next 2 weeks, the signal returned every night at the same hour, 1:17 a.m., as if on a schedule. The broadcasts never repeated. Each transmission described a different future event, all spoken in the same clinical tone. Dylan started cataloguing them on yellow legal pads, cross-checking what he could online. Most predictions were obscure. Minor plane crashes, closed-door political resignations, stock fluctuations that only made sense in hindsight. But a few were unmistakable. A 2006 subway bombing in Madrid. The 2008 market crash. The death of a famous athlete in 2014 down to the street corner. All predicted decades before they happened. Dylan tried convincing himself it was an elaborate hoax, pre-recorded messages inserted into the frequency using a hacked signal. But he'd studied audio engineering for years. The tapes had no compression artifacts, no modern signature. The voice was analog, recorded to reel tape, filtered through vacuum circuitry. He would have recognized a digital fake. One night, the broadcast mentioned a name. January 12th, 2023, fire breaks out in a tenement on West 82nd Street. One casualty, Mara Lynn, age 39, cause of death, smoke inhalation. Dylan dropped his pen. He hadn't heard that name in years. Mara had been in his high school chemistry class, quiet, brilliant, always sitting in the back with a sketchbook. He looked her up the next morning. A local obituary posted 4 days ago. Same age, same cause, same address. That was when he stopped pretending. The next night he joined an amateur radio forum using a burner account and posted a short clip of the signal. Within hours, someone replied. Another user in Connecticut had caught the same frequency. Then someone from Buffalo. A week later, Dylan was added to a private group chat. 8 members, all hobbyists, all listening, all scared. The signal wasn't localized. It was broadcasting across the Northeast, and it wasn't random. It was building towards something. They just didn't know what. Not yet. They called themselves the Loop Breakers. It started as a joke. Someone typed it during a late-night thread, and it stuck. 8 strangers spread across 4 states, all tuned to the same impossible voice. Most were older, retired engineers, ex-military techs, a couple of Cold War radio buffs who still believed in number stations and dead drops. Dylan was the youngest by 10 years. They met on encrypted video calls, always audio only. No names, just call signs. Dylan used trace. No one asked why. No one asked anything personal. What mattered was the signal. They logged every broadcast in a shared spreadsheet. Timestamps, word-for-word transcripts, waveform captures, mapped locations, cross-referenced events. The more they organized, the worse it looked. These weren't random historical events. They followed patterns, economic, social, even personal. One broadcast mentioned a small-town mayor's suicide 2 years before it happened. Another predicted a warehouse fire in Newark that took out a classified electronics lab. Nothing world-ending, just quiet shifts, nudges, every event verifiable, everyone recorded decades in advance. Theories flooded in. Some believed it was a rogue military experiment, some kind of predictive AI dumped onto a broadcast loop. Others thought it was psychological conditioning, planting stories early so people remembered them as truth later. Dylan didn't have a theory. but he couldn't stop listening. None of them could. One night, after a long gap in transmissions, the signal returned with something different. Coordinates, spoken twice in the same calm voice. They pointed to a stretch of desert
outside Tonopah, Nevada.
A ghost grid of access roads long since overgrown. At first, the group assumed it was nonsense, but a member called Vector pulled old satellite maps. In 1984, the area held a low-security research facility, Department of Energy. Now it was gone. Bulldozed. Every image after 1992 showed only sand. Then another member, Burner, found a missing persons case tied to the site. A technician named Paul Lance went missing in the summer of '84. Never found. Then he found something worse. Lance's name was listed on a privately archived autopsy report from 1996, cause of death, radiation poisoning, found buried 2 miles from the coordinates. Dylan read the report 3 times. Lance died 12 years after he disappeared, buried, in a place that didn't exist anymore. The signal had led them straight to a corpse. After the Lance file surfaced, something changed. One by one, the loop breakers went silent. First Vector. His last message was a time-stamped photo of a black SUV idling outside his house, windows up, engine off. Then Burner vanished. No warning, no replies. His username deleted. When Dylan checked the shared drive, 2 folders were missing, early signal logs and the Lance autopsy. Someone had purged them. The admins never responded. Within days, only 3 remained: Trace, Glassjaw, Pilgrim. Dylan felt the walls closing in. His own devices began to behave strangely. Notes he'd saved in a locked folder were missing lines. Recordings of the signal started looping with subtle changes, his own voice spliced in, reading from the script in the same calm cadence. At first, he thought it was a software glitch. Then he heard it live. During a late-night broadcast, the voice paused mid-sentence and said, "Trace, you're not supposed to be here." Clear. Unmistakable. Dylan yanked the power cord from the wall. After that, he stopped using his own equipment. He drove to a public library in Nassau, used a loaned laptop to search for anything on Paul Lance, but his name was gone. No court records, no social security trace. The newspaper obituary Burner had linked no longer existed. The page redirected to a 404 error. Dylan checked the cached archive. It had been scrubbed. Every mention of Lance, every reference to the Tonopah facility, gone. Even old forum threads had vanished. It wasn't just digital footprints being erased, it was history itself. That night, Dylan returned home and found his front door unlocked. Nothing stolen, nothing moved, just a subtle shift, drawers slightly. Open, closet light on. He didn't call the police. He knew what they'd say. He unplugged everything. Router, laptop, modem, phone, sat in the dark, listened. At 1:17 a.m., a faint hum filled the air. No device was powered on, yet the sound was there. Low, rhythmic, like a distant transmission bleeding through the walls. It pulsed once, then fell silent. Dylan sat motionless for hours, waiting for it to return. It didn't. But the silence felt worse. It felt deliberate. As if something was waiting for him to make the next move. The last 2 loop breakers vanished. Within a week, Pilgrim sent a message with no words, just a waveform file and a line of numbers, 7.83 Hz, 3.4 minutes. Dylan opened it in his old audio editor. The waveform looked normal at first, low frequency, minimal structure. But when he ran a spectrogram analysis, patterns emerged, geometric shapes, repeating triangles nested within each other, like fractals etched in sound. He boosted the gain and listened. The hum was barely audible, like wind through concrete. But something about it made him nauseous. The room seemed to shift. He closed the program and deleted the file. Glassjaw never sent anything. One night he posted a message. It's inside the tome. Then nothing. Dylan tried calling. Disconnected. Their account disappeared the next morning. Dylan stopped sleeping. He left the radio off, but still heard phantom signals. Sometimes in the static between television channels, sometimes in the white noise of his bathroom fan, he began noticing things. People loitering too long outside his apartment. Cars he didn't recognize parked in the same spot for days. One morning, his laptop turned itself on and displayed an audio editor, empty but recording. He hadn't touched it. He yanked the battery out. The next day, the same file reappeared on his phone, which he had turned off. It played 2 seconds of his own voice reading a broadcast that hadn't aired yet. He smashed the phone in the sink and stopped using electronics. But the symptoms didn't stop. At night, he'd dream in static. In one dream, he stood in a decommissioned Cold War facility, walls covered in maps labeled with dates he hadn't lived through. The dream ended with him speaking into a microphone, but he couldn't remember the words. He woke up with blood on his pillow. His ears had bled during the night. That was when he remembered the hurts. He dug through old notebooks and confirmed what Pilgrim had sent. Frequencies under 8 Hz, especially around 7.83, had been studied for their neurological effects. Inducing trance states, heightened suggestibility, behavioral shifts. He searched for military experiments from the 1980s and found fragments, scanned reports from now-deleted studies, Montauk, MK-class files, acoustic priming. One phrase appeared again and again, cognitive preloading. Dylan circled it, underlined it. The signal wasn't predicting anything, it was programming belief. Dylan stopped trusting his own memory. Simple details no longer lined up. He would return to his notes and find entire pages rewritten in handwriting that mimicked his own, almost perfectly. One night he discovered a sentence scrawled across the margin of a legal pad. You met her at Facility 12. He didn't remember writing it. He didn't know what Facility 12 was. Worse, he couldn't remember how he'd met his wife. It used to be college, or so he thought. Now that memory felt assembled, like a scene practiced too many times, her name in his head came with no emotional trace. He called her out of habit and got voicemail. The number disconnected 2 days later. Her social profiles were gone. Every photo they'd taken together was still on his hard drive, but in each, one her face was slightly off-center, eyes never looking quite at the lens. Dylan backed up everything, burned copies, mailed one to a P.O. box he'd rented under a different name. The next morning, the box had been cleared out. No sign of tampering. Just empty. He began avoiding mirrors. Something about his reflection felt wrong, delayed, like it was deciding what to do a half-second after he moved. When he finally turned the radio back on, the signal was stronger, clearer. No more interference. The voice now addressed him by name. Dylan Reeves, you will...
Warn them, you will not be believed.
The transmission ended with coordinates, this time just 20 miles away in Montauk. Dylan drove there the same night. The location was a fenced perimeter near the ruins of an old radar facility. Overgrown, no guards. The chain-link gate had
already been cut. Inside, he found nothing but decayed equipment and stripped concrete chambers, but when he walked beneath the old satellite dish, the hum returned.
Not mechanical, auditory. Like a pulse, traveling through his bones. He stood still, listening, as a memory surfaced, a white corridor, hands pressed to glass, men watching behind clipboards. The thought vanished before he could hold it. Dylan staggered back, drove home in silence and smashed every device he owned. Still, the voice stayed. It no longer needed wires. It was already inside. He heard it 3 nights later, calm, steady, unmistakably his own voice. This is Dylan Reeves. If you're hearing this, stop listening. The script is already inside you. The recording played at 1:17 a.m., just like always. No fanfare, no distortion. Just his voice, reading a warning he didn't remember recording. It listed events that hadn't happened yet. A chemical spill in Bergen County, a blackout in Boston, a missing child from Queens, his neighbor's son. Dylan had seen him riding his bike that morning. His stomach turned. The broadcast continued, naming the remaining loop breakers, all marked irrelevant. Then it paused. You have 6 days left, that's enough. Click. Silence. The following morning, Dylan packed a bag, left his apartment, and didn't return. He rented a car in cash, turned off every phone, and drove north without a map. For 3 days, he didn't speak to anyone. He kept moving. State parks, empty trailheads, cheap motels with analog locks. He burned the rest of his notes in a steel barrel behind an abandoned hardware store. On the 4th day, something shifted. The hum was gone. No voice. No interference. Just quiet. The kind that felt earned. He hiked 10 miles off-road and found an unlisted cabin he'd rented years ago and forgotten. He stayed. No internet. No power. Just a propane stove, a manual, typewriter, and the forest. He began writing everything down, not for proof, for clarity, for whatever remained of himself. He wrote about the signal, about the others, about memory as something that could be installed. He didn't try to explain it anymore, he just described it. Sometimes the dreams returned, long corridors, black suits, wires under skin, but they passed. He learned to let them. Months went by, then a year. Dylan stopped waiting for the next broadcast. He didn't need it. He knew what it was now, not a prediction, but a program. Not a warning, but an instruction. And whatever system had sent it, whatever Cold War machine still churned beneath the surface of reality, it had moved on. But Dylan hadn't. He remained, awake, changed, quiet, watching, just in case the signal ever came back. And if it did, he wouldn't run. He'd be ready. My daughter flickered once, just a stutter like a buffering video, and I knew something in the world had come undone. Lena had dismissed the debug unit at first. It sat on her kitchen counter for a week, still in its matte white Aeon optics, box, half buried under takeout receipts and unopened school flyers. Her daughter, Mia, had brought it home after a field trip to Aeon's campus, a hands-on AR showcase the permission slip had promised. Lena had once helped design the interface they probably showed off that day. She'd even led the early UX prototype sprint before getting laid off during the company's quiet pivot to neural AR. That was years ago now. She wasn't bitter, just tired. The kind of tired that doesn't go away with sleep. It was a Wednesday night when she finally pulled the headset out. Not out of curiosity, but boredom. Mia was asleep. The house was still. The rain outside gave everything a soft interior hum. The debug overlay was minimal, frame rate diagnostics, eye-tracking telemetry, and a stubbed-out dev menu labeled System Integrity Experimental. She selected it without thinking. That's when the screen pulsed, barely perceptible, and the world around her shifted. It started small. The hallway light was on, except she hadn't turned it on. The calendar on the fridge read Tuesday, not Wednesday. In the corner of her vision, faint, translucent outlines shimmered against the walls like heat ripples. One of them lingered in the hallway, tall, human-shaped, featureless. It didn't move, didn't react. It just stood there, watching. Lena pulled the glasses off, heart racing. Everything snapped back to normal. She walked the hallway. Nothing. The light was off. The calendar showed Wednesday. It must have been a bug, something left in debug mode, but her hands wouldn't stop, shaking. She'd seen render artifacts before. This wasn't that. This wasn't visual. It was structural, like her house had loaded wrong. She should have thrown the unit out, called Aeon, but instead she turned it back on. She watched the hallway for an hour. The outline didn't return, but the static menu now had a new option. Timeline, divergence, v7.log. And that's when Mia walked in, blurry around the edges, flickering once before she solidified again. Lena didn't sleep that night, and in the morning her daughter couldn't remember the field trip. The file was buried deep, hidden in a diagnostic partition that wasn't supposed to exist on a consumer unit. Lena only found it by accident, toggling through the developer console while the glasses sat idle on her kitchen table. Timeline to divergence, or v7.log. Just seeing the name unsettled her. She tapped it open, expecting code dumps or system errors. Instead, it was a list, a long one. Each line began with a timestamp, followed by a short string. Object divergence detected, correction queued, observer proximity, high. The final line stood out. It was recent. 031712, subject L. Kim marked pending correction. She stared at the words until her hands began to sweat. There was no location metadata. No further explanation. But the implication sat in her chest, like weight. She was the subject, and something or someone had marked her for correction. For the next hour, Lena moved slowly through her house, wearing the headset like a second skin. Everything looked normal until it didn't. The hallway shifted subtly when she turned her head too quickly. A picture frame doubled for half a second before snapping back into place. The microwave display flickered unreadable characters. When she took the glasses off, everything looked fine. But the file updated in real time. Each anomaly she noticed corresponded to a new entry. A lamp duplicated briefly in her peripheral vision. Spatial redundancy corrected. She heard her name whispered behind her ear, though no one was there. Auditory anomaly suppressed. With each update, her name appeared more frequently. The file wasn't just recording the system, it was watching her watch it. She tested, the glasses on old footage, thinking maybe it was a live environment bug. But when she replayed a birthday video from 2 years ago, her daughter flickered again.
Once during the candles, once in the background mirror. When Lena paused the video, the frame warped and reloaded with the cake missing. She checked the file. Subject M. Kim, redundant event detected. Correction successful. Mia was being rewritten.
Moments of her life were vanishing without a trace, except in the log. That night, Lena unplugged every smart device in the house and locked the glasses in the garage. But she still woke at 3:17, gasping for air, certain something had been watching. Asleep. Lena didn't tell anyone, not because she was afraid they wouldn't believe her. She knew they wouldn't. Instead, she went back to Aeon's old developer forums, long since shut down, but still archived through mirrors. She found posts from early testers, most flagged, or removed. One stood out. User Eve1 had written, "If you see your reflection move differently than you do, stop using the glasses. You've already been marked." It was dated 2 years ago. The user had no other activity. Lena checked the log again. Her name had shifted to the top of the list. The line had changed, pending correction, proximity, escalating. She ran a key diagnostic. No results. Every system said the firmware was clean, but the glasses now started on their own. Twice, she found them powered on in the garage, displaying faint overlays even when idle. One morning, the living room window appeared, slightly larger when viewed through the lens. She measured it. It hadn't changed physically, but the AR showed a mismatch. When she marked the anomaly in the console, the file updated with a new phrase. User intervention logged. Observer awareness elevated. Mia didn't remember bringing the unit home. When Lena asked, her daughter looked confused. "What glasses?" she said, blinking slowly like she was trying to recall a dream. Her voice was flat, too steady. At school pickup, Mia walked out late, paused mid-step, and froze for 3 seconds. No one else seemed to notice. Lena grabbed her arm. "Did you feel that?" she asked. Mia smiled. "Feel what?" Later, Lena checked her phone. All their old photos of Mia had slightly shifted compositions, poses altered, backgrounds different, a birthday cake replaced with a pie. By now, the log file had hundreds of entries. Patterns began to emerge, timestamps clustered around 3:17 a.m., changes described with the same vague phrasing, temporal smoothing, narrative stitching, conflict resolution. Lena stopped sleeping. Each night, she watched the screen as new entries appeared in real time. The latest one read, "Home geometry recalibrated. Subject unaware. Initiate passive sync." She walked through the house. The hallway now had 5 doors. It used to have 4. The blue door at the end hadn't been there yesterday, and her childhood home never had a blue door. Lena stood in front of the blue door for 10 minutes before touching the knob. It was cold, colder than the rest of the house, like it had its own atmosphere. She opened it slowly. Behind it wasn't a room, but a hallway almost identical to the one she'd just walked through. Same paint, same light fixtures, but with subtle differences. The framed art was wrong. The floor creaked in places it shouldn't. She stepped inside, half expecting to wake up. But the door closed behind her with a soft click. When she turned, it was gone. Just another blank wall. Her ears rang. Not loud, but persistent. She opened the debug overlay and found the log had changed format. It now showed dual timelines. Each entry was mirrored, with one version marked local and another marked null. Both listed her name. Her movements were being tracked across 2 sets of data. She scrolled back to earlier entries. In the null log, Mia's name didn't appear at all. Her daughter was missing, erased. But in the local log, Mia flickered in and out, tagged unstable node, anchor risk. Lena moved carefully through the new hallway. It led to a room shaped like her living room but stripped of detail. No furniture, no pictures, just dimensions. A kind of template. As she crossed it, the glasses buzzed faintly and a line appeared.
On the display. Local environment deprecated. Active transition in progress. The stomach turned. The walls pulsed slightly as if breathing. She took the glasses off. The room vanished.
She stood in an empty crawl space, dusty and narrow. She'd never seen it before, but it had been here the whole time, hidden behind insulation. When she put the glasses back on, the space rebuilt itself instantly. Walls, fixtures, soft white, light. Her world was a projection mapped onto forgotten corners of real structures. And someone was changing the map. The log updated again. Timeline engineer present. Passive sync failure. Local Lena deviated. She didn't know what that meant. But when she turned around, she saw a figure in the mirror, her reflection, but the wrong clothes, the wrong expression. It didn't move with her. Then it smiled. And Lena didn't. Lena stood frozen, staring at Mia across the table. Her daughter hadn't moved in over a minute. The spoon hovered mid-air, a drip of milk clinging to its edge. Her eyes were open, her breathing shallow, but there was nothing behind them, no presence, no awareness. Lena spoke her name again, louder this time, then reached across the table and touched her wrist.
Mia didn't flinch. Her pulse was normal, her skin was warm, but something essential had gone missing. Lena stood slowly, backing away as the air in the room thickened. It felt like the moment before a power outage, everything on the edge of
going dark. She ran to the garage, grabbed the glasses from the freezer, and put them on. They powered up instantly, screen lit with a pale ripple across the center. No boot screen, no system prompt, just the log scrolling non-stop. The most recent line pulsed softly in red. Containment confirmed. Anchor loop established. Begin behavioral mirroring. Her eyes darted to Mia, now flickering slightly at the edges. Not visibly, not to the naked eye, but through the overlay, her daughter shimmered like bad compression. Lena whispered, "Can you hear me?" No answer, but a new entry blinked onto the log. Observer query registered, passive sync maintained. Lena's heart pounded. She turned to scan the room. Everything looked intact but felt staged, too clean, too symmetrical, too prepared. In the hallway, the wall near the light switch glitched slightly, revealing a layer underneath. She stepped closer, touched it. The surface pulsed under her palm. The room restructured itself in front of her eyes, sliding away like a shell. Behind it, white walls, ambient lighting, a sterile chair facing a tall black screen. Seated in the chair was herself, or a version of her, still calm, clothes unwrinkled, hair tucked neatly behind one ear. The overlay labeled it Instance, L. Kim corrected. Lena stumbled back, breath catching. The glasses buzzed as a new log entry appeared. Unauthorized perspective confirmed. User marked for re-evaluation. She ripped the glasses off, stumbling into the kitchen. Everything snapped back to normal, but Mia didn't move. Her face held the same expression, as if paused in a half-finished moment. Lena grabbed her phone, desperate to call someone, anyone, but a voicemail appeared before she could dial.
No caller ID. She tapped play. Her father's voice filled the room, gentle, measured, unmistakable, despite 15 years in the ground. "Lena, don't let them fix you. The clean version isn't you." She dropped the phone. Her ears rang.
Her body trembled. She looked down at the glasses, now blank, then back at Mia, still unmoving, but her eyes now followed Lena's every move. The log flickered once more and resolved to a single line. Local Lena scheduled for divergence. Runtime host acknowledged. Lena tried everything. She shook Mia gently, called her name, waved a hand in front of her face. Nothing changed. Her daughter sat motionless, spoon raised halfway to her mouth, cereal slowly dissolving in milk. Her eyes remained open but distant, focused on something behind the room, as if watching a scene she couldn't describe. Lena whispered her name again, softer this time. Mia. No reaction. Her skin was warm, her pulse steady, but she was gone. Not unconscious, not sleeping, just removed. She grabbed the glasses from the freezer, ice still clinging to the frame. They powered on before she could press anything. The log filled the screen immediately. No menu, no startup overlay. Real-time lines scrolled upward, dense and clinical. At the top, a new entry flashed red, containment confirmed. Primary, anchor unresponsive, external observer detected. Her mouth went dry. She turned in place, scanning the room. Everything looked normal, but it wasn't. The shadows were too soft, the clutter too symmetrical. There was no noise, not the hum of the fridge, not the rain. It all felt constructed. Then she saw it. Just beyond the edge of the display, the corner of the living room wall glitched.
Not dramatically, just a shimmer like a heat ripple. She approached, slowly, heart pounding. As she reached out, the walls stuttered, briefly revealing another space underneath. White, sterile, a chair, a screen, no windows, and in the chair
Sat someone who looked just like her. Lena stepped back. Her mind raced. A new log line appeared. Unauthorized perspective accessed. Secondary instance acknowledged. Correction in progress. She took off the glasses. The room shifted violently, walls snapping back, air thick with pressure. She nearly fell. When her vision cleared, Mia was still frozen, but something had changed. On Lena's phone, a voicemail had appeared. No missed call, just the message. She played it. Her father's voice, gentle, unmistakable. "Lena, don't let them fix you. The clean version isn't you." He'd been dead 15 years. She stared at the screen, trembling. The log shifted again. Local Lena archived. Runtime host active. Thoughts fractured. Archived. She touched her face, unsure if it was still hers. If she'd been archived, then who was watching through her eyes? Lena didn't remember sitting down, but she found herself on the floor, glasses back on, breath shallow, staring at the words. Runtime host acknowledged. She tried to speak, but couldn't form a sound. Her reflection in the oven door didn't match her posture. It lagged, then caught up, like the image wasn't just mirrored, but transmitted. She stood slowly, limbs heavy, and walked to the living room, where the air had thickened, grainy around the edges. A faint prompt hovered in her periphery. Divergence, threshold. Reached. Enter correction space? She didn't touch anything, but the room folded anyway, dissolving outward like data uncatching. The floor became white, the furniture faded. She stood, now in a corridor of flat light, endless in both directions. Her footsteps echoed with no source, no walls to carry the sound. At the far end, a figure waited, still and patient. As she approached, she saw her own face, cleaner, sharper, rested. The other Lena watched her with neither judgment nor sympathy. "You resisted," she said. "I didn't." Lena stopped a few feet away. The corridor hummed beneath her skin, not with heat or cold, but alignment, like her body was being fitted into something. "Is this what happens to everyone?" she asked. The other Lena nodded once. Everyone who asks the wrong question, everyone who sees past the frame. Lena looked past her to a single black door standing in the void. "And if I open that?" "Then you leave, but you won't come back." Lena felt something loosen inside her chest. Not fear, not clarity, just the surrender that comes when there's nothing else left to hold. She moved toward the door. The other Lena didn't follow. "They'll let you go," she said softly, "but you'll never be alone again." Lena didn't answer. She opened the door and stepped through. The world reformed quietly, like breath returning after a long hold. Her house was warm. The light outside was golden. Mia sat at the kitchen table, laughing at something on her tablet. The log was gone. The glasses were gone. Everything felt still, grounded, almost untouched. But Lena felt it. The delay, the microsecond lag behind every shadow, like the world was waiting for her to stop watching. And at night, in the bedroom window, she sometimes saw the other version of herself, just standing, half-lit, smiling faintly through the glass, still, there to maintain the illusion she chose to live inside.